Okay, so this video is pretty long, but I didn't want to cut anything because I want people to see it exactly how it was. Basically, I've broke the video down into two parts. The first part is from an event in Dayton, Ohio. It was talking about gender and reality TV, and there were a bunch of people from Survivor there. There was Eliza Orlins, Becky Lee, Bryce, Wendell, Big Brother winner Taylor. They talked for a solid 2 hours, and there was a lot of interesting facts in there about just gender and reality TV. The second part of this video, I interviewed what could be the first ever transgender Survivor female. I had to think about that. There's been 2 people on Survivor that were male that were female that went to male, but never anyone that's went from male to female. Look, I realize in the comment section everyone's blowing up about woke this, woke that, Survivor's soft, blah blah blah. Survivor is a social experiment, okay? So try to just appreciate it for what it is. So watch until the end. Maybe you'll learn something, and then I'll give my my Jerry Springer's final thought on it. All right, so I'm here at Dayton University for the talking about the role of gender in reality TV, or I think just TV in general, with a bunch of people that were on Survivor. So this should be interesting. It's really a pretty campus up here. I have no idea what to expect, but I just try to be open-minded about everything in life. I don't want to end up like a certain family member of mine that still blames Obama for breaking his microwave. Can't go to Portland because of Antifa. Couldn't find Portland on a map. Wind turbines in Texas are killing all the bald eagles. This is for real a pretty campus. Gotta watch out for the golf carts. They will mow you down. This campus had everything from billiards to fingernails.
We kindly ask that you silence your cell phone.
I want to thank all of you for coming to the University of Dayton here today. At UD, we are committed to collaboration and community, and this event is quintessential UD. A collaboration across the university that brings together so many members of our community to discuss gender. More and more, we're faced with political divisions that make these conversations difficult to have. But if we don't have these conversations, these divisions will become much worse, and it is imperative that we host discussions that allow for diverse ideas and conversation. With that in mind, I'm looking forward to today's discussion on gender and reality television.
I saw a message on X posted by Survivor David versus Goliath contestant Gabby Pascuzzi about a paper that was written by a professor at the University of Dayton, and as soon as I saw it, like a light bulb went off in my head.
Hi everyone, thank you all so much for being here today. It's great to see so many fellow reality TV fans, and especially Survivor and Big Brother fans. So I've been watching Survivor since it started. We're gonna spare us the year, but I was in college just like many of you, and I remember at the beginning of our sophomore year was the finale for Borneo, and we all got together to watch it in our dorms, and I remember just thinking like, this is really awesome, and I just became hooked on the show after that. And then, I continued to watch season after season after season, and I started to notice a trend, and so I'm gonna see if you can notice it as well. So these are all of the people who have been voted off the show first. If you take a look at this, there's something that stuck out to me year after year watching this show. And let me reorganize it, I think, and it'll make it a little bit easier to see. So if you look at it this way, there's quite a discrepancy between the number of men and women who are voted out of the game first. Now keep in mind, every season has 50% men, 50% women. And so I had observed this, and I know from my training as a social psychologist and in statistics that just because something looks like a trend doesn't mean that it's necessarily a trend, right? We've got to analyze the data and look at the data. And so this was my post-tenure goals, to look at the data. I said, okay, let me just get tenure first, and then we'll go to the fun stuff. And so I got tenure, and I was working with some students who were really excited about looking at this data, and so that's what we did. After season 40 finished, my colleagues, Dr. Jennifer Howell, who's at UC Merced, and a graduate student from the University of Dayton, Nicole Beasley. Is Nicole here? Where is she? Hi, thank you. Yeah. So we got together and we started working on this paper. And we wanted to look at whether there were gender and racial bias at different critical points of the game in Survivor. So we examined whether we looked at being voted out of your tribe first, making the merge, being a finalist, and then winning the game. And then it was even better when we found out that the paper was accepted for publication at one of the best journals in psychology. And so once it was accepted, like officially got the email, I did what any rational, level-headed researcher does, and I immediately tweeted about it. It was still Twitter at the time. So, no. So I immediately went to Twitter and started, a big long thread about this. And it's really a good thing that I did, because that's really what has brought us here today. That's when Merck's reached out about this event.
So that's when we got to work getting together what I feel is a super eclectic panel of guests on this topic. I guess it's time to bring them out, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah? All right, first, we couldn't do a panel on gender without including Eliza Orleans from Survivor Vanuatu, Survivor Micronesia, and The Amazing Race 31. She's also a career public defender in New York City.
Also joining us today is Becky Lee from Survivor Cook Islands. She was a finalist that season, and she used some of her prize money to start Becky's Fund. Becky's Fund is a national nonprofit focused on preventing and ending gender-based violence. And so with October being National Domestic Violence Month, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we knew that we had Becky here with us today.
A hand for Becky. Next, we are joined by the winner of Big Brother 24, the first African-American woman and only the second African-American person ever to win Big Brother, anti-sexual harassment advocate Taylor Hale.
And finally, the two amazing individuals that brought us here today. First, we'll bring out Survivor Cagayan's Bryce Isaiah.
And Survivor Ghost Island winner Wendell Holland.
Okay, so we're going to have a question and answer session today towards the end. If you would like to submit a question, we ask that you go to Bryce and Wen Present on Instagram, and they have pinned at the top the flyer for today's event. So if you leave your question as a comment on that post, we'll look at them during the question and answer period, okay? So submit those questions. Okay, so we're going to start off with, we have things broken down into different topics. So we're going to start off with what I think is probably the thing players fear the most when they're going on a reality TV competition show, being the first person voted out. Okay, this is what kind of inspired my work in this area. So people are on the show for really just a few days before the first boot happens. They don't really know much about each other, and when we don't know that much about each other, our impressions of other people they're often formed based on stereotypical information about groups they belong to. So instead of actually forming an impression of someone based on who they are, things like gender shape your impression of them. And so, and ultimately, we found that can have an impact on who ends up going home first in these reality TV competition shows.
So we're going to start with our first question, which we're going to ask the entire panel. I think, Eliza, we're going to start with you and then go down the line. All of you survived the first elimination in each of your seasons. How much did gender play a role in your thought process about who to vote out?
Well, I was on a all-women's tribe for my first season, so I would say it both was everything and also nothing to do with who we voted out first. And then in Micronesia, the first boot should have been a woman. However, about a week prior to going out there, Danny Bonaducci, flipped Johnny Fairplay over his shoulder, which caused Johnny Fairplay to faceplant and bust his mouth open. And he was taking a bunch of painkillers. He was really in bad shape, and so he, like 2 people on the current season, requested to be voted out. Which, check out my TikTok if you really want to know my feelings about that. And so I would say that in my seasons, that was not the most relevant factor.
Similarly in Survivor Cook Islands, I was on the tribe where, I don't know if the season watching it would divide by race, and so it was a pretty controversial, I think, in the very beginning in terms of looking at the commonalities, but also for strategy. I'm talking about how you vote somebody out. Obviously, pre-merge, you're often looking, and you're up, to the vote someone off, looking for the weakest person. So typically, it wasn't like, okay, a person's a female, male, female, or a woman, man, versus obviously looking at the strengths for us being able to move forward. So I don't think in our case, specifically in our decisions, we were looking at gender.
Thanks for the show of hands. Who in the auditorium is a Big Brother fan? Okay, all right. So if you saw the most recent season, my experience was a little unique in that the live feeds of the show turned on just a couple hours after we started the game. And the conversations about me in particular immediately started based on Taylor is not a girl's girl. Taylor does not want to work with women. And then the men in the house also thought that I was only playing them so that I would use my feminine wiles to get further in the game, which is another conversation. So when we talk about gender stereotypes, when we talk about how people look at women who play the game, all those stereotypes were instantly thrown upon me. And I was sitting on the chopping block, and by the grace of a twist at the final hour, I ended up staying. All those biases that we think about were immediately put onto me and ultimately could have led to me being the first boot. I looked out.
Although I wasn't the first boot of my season, when my tribe went up, I happened to be the first eliminated from my tribe, so there really wasn't much for me to think about. My tribe decided to go after the more attractive, the more handsome, the most funny person. So for me, I just kept my head up high.
Sorry about that, Bryce. For my first season, my tribe won the first challenge, and a woman, Stephanie Gonzalez, was voted out first. We then won the second challenge, and a man was voted out, and then there was a swap, and a new tribe was formed, was half of my tribe and half of the other tribe. And we targeted, there was also a twist that sent this player named Chris to another island, and we targeted his ally, Angela, who we thought was his ally, Angela. So that is myself, my buddy Dom, targeting a woman. I thought we targeted her because she was tied to Chris. We were trying to weaken Chris. But the tribe that swapped in with us, they had other plans. We thought we were working with them, and we're like, yeah, we're all gonna target Angela. Great, awesome, easy vote. And at that vote, we got blindsided because another ally of ours, Morgan, was voted out. So at that vote, we were targeting Angela, a woman, and they voted out Morgan, a woman. I didn't think that it was us trying to eliminate a woman in the game. I thought we were trying to limit, weaken Chris's power at the time. But ultimately, there was a woman voted out first, and then our first time going to a tribal, 2 women were targeted. So that is the outcome. So looking at it from that perspective, although I didn't consciously, try to go for a woman, or I don't think the tribe that merged in with us was trying to, go for a woman. That's what happened. So the outcome was 2 women out first from each tribe, kind of, sort of. And it's just something that we need to look at, because historically we see that, and that's why I think these panels are so important.
If I may just jump in here, I think it's really interesting that you're saying both of these tribes were targeting what just happened to be women because of the relationships that they had with men. Did men insulate and protected themselves by having relationships with women? And so many of these strategic competition shows, these reality games, that's what we see happening. We see men saying, well, I'm just gonna take along or align with this woman because she's expendable to me. Or I know that other people are going to go after her before they come after me. That happened in Survivor, it happened on my season, and I think it's just a larger representation of what we see happening in the real world as well.
And to piggyback on that, if I'm really looking at it, my allies were myself, Dom, and Morgan. Morgan is the one that was voted out, that blindsided us. And this other half of our tribe, they could have taken out me or Dom at that point, but they opted to go with this woman who happened to be very strong, the best swimmer on the show, but still they decided to target her first. So that goes to show what happens.
Oh, and then there was Winners at War.
Oh. See, I talked a lot about those diamonds because that was my good season.
Where it was Winners at War is woman, 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 woman.
Yeah.
Woman.
Yeah.
Okay.
Winners at War, we're trying to forget that season.
We're home on the first merge, do you know?
Okay, so
Me, if you didn't know.
Eliza, so you mentioned this before, but the way Vanuatu began, you couldn't not think about gender. Not only were tribes split into men and women, but the men were basically treated to a ceremony in their honor while the women were basically cast off to the side on the floor and ignored. How did that start impact your tribe?
So I was 21 years old when I went on Survivor Vanuatu back in 2004, 19 years ago. And I loved Survivor from episode 1 of season 1. Literally was watching the show, turned to my mom, was like, I'm gonna be on that show one day. And Susan, for anyone who knows her, was like, of course you are, sweetheart, you can do anything. And now she says, be careful what you tell your kids because they believe you. And I applied and got cast the first time I applied. So I'm out there, it's day 1, and I can't even believe it. I am just like grinning, like they're coming at us with spears. I don't know if you remember, it's like this crazy thing, we're coming in on boats, and I'm just have the biggest smile on my face because there I am on Survivor. I'm finally gonna get to experience this. And you know, they line us up for this like local special ceremony, and you know, they seat the men on these kind of stools, like kind of in the middle, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then they seat us on the ground off to the side. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a little strange, but you know, let's just see what happens. And then they very violently kill a pig in front of us, and then they smear the blood on each of the men's heads. And then I'm like, okay, well, here we go. Like, I'm gonna get my blood now. Like, and it never came. And then the men got to compete to climb up a pole and retrieve this stone, this rock that was, you know, had spiritual powers on the island. And the women were not invited to participate. We're not invited to participate in that competition. So from the get-go, women were subjugated on Survivor Vanuatu. Like, we were like the lower class, we were treated differently, and it was an incredibly, you know, evident and stark reminder of that feeling. And actually, of an interesting kind of backstory of this is that we traveled, so there were 18 of us on that season, you might remember, and we traveled in, divided by age. They flew us separately. It was 9 and 9, and we traveled, and it was, you know, me and Julie and Dolly and John Kenny and Brooke, and you know, it was all the young people, and I was like, what is this, MTV Spring Break or Survivor? Like, I was so hot, and it was like, no, seriously, it was crazy, and so we get there, and then all of a sudden, because of, and I think that is, they've never confirmed it, but it's my understanding that that's what they intended the tribe split to be for the first time ever. But because of the way this opening ceremony was going to play out, they said, oh, no, we clearly have to split this by gender. And so that changed the entire course of the way the season played out, because we were split in this way, and like the women were, you know, kind of cast off to the side. So that definitely had an impact on the start of the game. And I think it had an impact on the entire season, because once they realized that was gonna happen, they had to make challengers that weren't just like, carry heavy thing from here to here. And so it actually, you know, I know we're gonna talk about challenges later, but it really did have an impact on that.
Taylor, you touched on this in your first answer, but you were targeted by the women almost like right at the start of the game. What do you think led to them targeting you?
They saw me looking at myself in a mirror, being extremely confident. No, I'm kidding. I come from the pageant world. I was Miss Michigan USA 2021, and that's something I'm very proud of still to this day. I also won Miss Congeniality when I competed at Miss USA, which is the one award when all the other contestants vote for the person that is the kindest and easiest to get along with. I am literally credentialed in being kind and easy to get along with, and one that is a friend to women. So when I walk into the Big Brother house and I have this gem-toned dress on and big boofy hair, and I'm smiling, this big Colgate smile on people's faces, I know that my confidence can feel like a weapon, or it can inspire insecurity in other people. But I do my best to make my confidence inspire confidence in other people. When you are in an environment of Big Brother, people are going to assume the negative and run with it because there's incentive to do so. Now, what was unfortunate is that I knew that there was no way that I could conceal that about me, and I would just want to walk into the house and own myself and say, hey, this is how I am, and we can all work together as women to take it to the end. I did not have that opportunity. Within seconds of getting in the house, the women were in a back room making an alliance called Girls Girls that I was excluded from. I don't say these things to say those people were just jealous of me, but I say these things to point out the ways in which our society take insecurities that women have within themselves and use them to pit us against each other. And it's so frustrating because year after year we have women that want to work together, but we let the men or larger social implications twist our minds into putting us back against each other. And I hope, maybe in the next season, we will have that all women's alliance because we are all capable women of doing it. It's just unfortunate that these, the ways in which we are so accustomed to being pitted against each other continue to happen in the Big Brother house. I want to see it change so badly.
So in our paper, we found that women were 72% more likely to be voted out of their tribe first. So here's some data from, I love data. Here's some data from our paper. This is looking at, out of all the tribes of all the seasons, and this is including 41 plus, 41 through 44. 45 has been a little odd this season. So these are the first people who were voted out of their tribe. So not just voted out of the game first. Women are 72% more likely to be voted out first. We stopped at season 40 in the paper that we published, but this pattern persists. And so just to give you an idea, if men and women were voted out equally, those bars would essentially be about the same size, right? So the blue line across the graph is where equal would be. And so we see that women are more likely to be voted out and men are less likely than they should be based on the number of them expected that are observed in the game. So Becky, do you think that when people are in the game, and Wenzel sort of touched on this, but they're consciously, intentionally trying to vote women out, or is it more of just this like subtle gender bias emerging that is, really kind of rampant in society, and it's coming up there as well?
I know we're gonna go about the riding coattails like alliances, but I think just like you mentioned before about, when you create those, if a man and woman is on a team and successful, like in life, often the roles of who gets credit as well as who is the leader of the group, the leader of that success. Typically, I think because even gender roles that we see typically in society, I think you see that in the show. And I see, even in our human interactions, because I think that even the whole idea about riding coattails, that's a strategy itself. But I think, like you mentioned, when a woman versus a man, you don't ever hear someone saying a man riding coattails. That's more like his strategy is playing it cool or creating the right allies, So I think in that same sense, they are maybe not as obvious, but those biases are there.
Now it's time for my favorite section of today, what we like to call alliances. So thanks to Richard Hatch, it's pretty much impossible to get as far as you want without a strong and loyal alliance, let alone win. In Survivor and Big Brother, we have seen all women alliances before, but each have varying degrees of success. When they're successful, like in the Amazon, Micronesia, and One World, women win the game. But for some reason, and I think Taylor just talked about it, like all women alliances don't really happen every single time. So again, I want to go to Taylor on this. Like when you talk about girls, did you ever think that that alliance had a chance? Why do you think that they didn't include you? And just overall, watching the show back, what do you think about the formation of that group?
Oh my God, there's a clip of me on the live feeds where I woke up, I was in bed, no one would talk to me. And I would just hear the chaos happening in the Big Brother house. And when there's 16 people, and I'm an only child, so chaos is like, it's really chaotic to me. When people see you walking in and out of rooms and you know who's aligning with each other, I remember looking to the camera and saying, if these people are making alliances without me, they are stupid. Stupid. Because I am a very competitive, well-rounded player. And it was so frustrating because I knew going into the game, you take a look at me, I've got a pretty athletic build, being an attractive person can help you in life. And I benefit from that. I'm pretty privileged. I did not think it would be difficult for me to get into alliances and to be alienated from a group that I value, that historically should have embraced me. It was just so infuriating because I remember in my intro package, I literally said, I'm gonna take the women, we're all gonna go together, we're gonna play it stealth, but we're gonna get there in the end together. And even as I continued to be backstabbed by different allies throughout the game, who were playing their own games, I still held on to my number one ally, who was a woman, because it was important to me to see two women in those final 2 seats in the end. So the formation of Girls and the dissolution of Girls did not surprise me, because I think if you're going to make an alliance and build the alliance at its core around alienating another person or abandoning what that person could bring to the table, your alliance is floppy. There's no substance, and I also think you kind of need like a cheerleader or a rallying cry, someone that's gonna give you the why to keep going in the end. The why for Girls could have been, we are strong women that want to support each other. What it was is we want to tear this other person down, and that's not gonna push anything further.
Okay, so very often there's strong pairs or trios that develop throughout the game, and they'll often include men and women, both making it far. But when that happens, we tend to see, and Becky, you touched on this, the women are described as riding coattails, basically implying that the only reason why the woman made it that far is because of her alliance with a stronger man. And what's not really being said is that the man has earned making it that far, whereas the woman has not. And so I've watched every season of Survivor, and many more than once. I really like it. And so I say this with the utmost confidence that I've never heard a man described as riding coattails of a woman in this game. At a final tribal council or at a final vote. And so, and Becky, this isn't unfamiliar to you. So this was brought up at your final tribal council. You and Yule had a really strong alliance throughout the game. And it was perceived by the jurors that you rode his coattails to the end. And so you basically had to spend the final tribal council defending yourself against this accusation and this perception that people had. And so, why do you think that the riding coattails accusation is really limited to women? And why do you think, or do you think that aligning with men can be a good strategic move?
I think we all know that we think about like infiltrating the old boys club, people who are empowered to play, and in order to get invited to the table, you then often you need that person to bring you along, right? And so I think in my season, there was, I think, even episode 3 where I knew that Cowboy was gunning for me. And yes, at the very beginning though, but in terms of the relationships in our own tribe, I think also I learned very quickly with Cowboy in terms of women in his life, and also in respect to how he saw women. And I think that right away I realized, especially for numbers and seeing who were the allies in our tribe, that he did not like somebody speaking up to him, pushing back against him, telling him that he was acting crazy or XYZ. And so I knew then at that time that he also was then looking to get me out, and obviously creating the right alliances with Jonathan and Yul, who were, I mean, as many of you know, with Yul, he was very matter of fact, very straightforward, very trustworthy. From the very beginning when we first met, both lawyers, really were interested and also very, very nervous about being on this season. We were divided by races, so we were very, very cautious about how we would portray anything that we did might be played as a stereotype. So already in the beginning, we knew that also for our, I mean, if you know anything about this, like they did that whole theme because there was a lot of controversy and a lot of complaints about diversity on reality television in general. So then we already are in that situation, we got really close. And so Yul, from the very start, we knew that we wanted to work together to see how far we get together to the end. And so we already had that commonality, right? Wanting to help each other, especially you don't really see a lot of Asian Americans in reality television and in general. And then also for trying to work as a real alliance. I'm not going to backstab each other. And later on, as you know, when he offered me the idol, and people complain like, "Are you really trying to win?" But it was more than that. It was about how we play the game with integrity and character. Plus, we have to go back to our lives after we leave the show, and we are real people with real careers. And so, I mean, that's another tangent. But in the sense of this episode, I remember, you know, I was like, "Yo, he won't even talk to me," and he's very like, I can't even rationalize. So he's like, let me be the bridge, right, to be able to address and talk to him. And you know, they were able to obviously convince him to not vote me out, and then Cecilia was able to the vote for that. But also, I think your second question was about strategy, right? I think often too, not only do we often need the ally to invite us to the table, we also need them to talk to the other people in that same circle, right? And even though we see, I mean, it's 2023, we think we've come so far, but still, we know this happens all the time. In the legal world, I mean, in DC, often things are happening all the time, and unless you're invited to the table or even the opportunity to know that it's happening, you often not going to get that opportunity, right? So I think the correct alliance has to be made to be able to even have the conversation, have the opportunity to even be there.
Wendell, you were in an alliance with Dom and Laurel. All three of you got to the end. Was your decision making different from when you decided to align with Dom versus when you decided to align with Laurel?
I think Dom and I had a connection since casting, actually. So we just happened to be in the same batch of casting during a particular week in LA, and we happened to get in a van. We made it through the week. We got in a van, and they took like 5 or 6 of us to the CBS lot for like the final round. I got in the van first. Dom was behind me, and like I'm going to the back of the van, and I see him. I reach up, give him a little dap, and then I'm like, all right, I got a connection with somebody. You're not allowed to talk to these people in casting. But fast forward 3 months, and I see him on the island, and I know I had this small little connection with somebody. So we happened to be on the same tribe together to start, so we had this bond. And after 2 vote outs, and we had this new swap, Laurel comes with her 3 members of the Malolo tribe, and yes, they blindsided us. We thought we were going for Angela. They went for Morgan. They got one of our like strong allies out. So I had to build trust with Laurel over the next few days. And fortunately, after another swap, Laurel and I were on a tribe together again. So with Dom, it was an instant connection from a dap on the back of a van. But with Laurel, it was her and her tribe mates blindsided us. They got us really good. Like, they really taught us Survivor during that tribal council. And very fortunately, Dom and I made it through that tribal council. So over maybe about a week and a half of like working together, winning, losing, etc., Laurel and I built up this trust with one another. So maybe again here, maybe it's easier for me to see a guy and dap him up. And, you know, we have a connection, we're throwing down, and then maybe it's a matter of, I didn't dap up any women during you know, casting. So maybe that's part of it, or maybe it's, I'm trying to like look this subconscious bias in the face, because I want to say that, like, you know, Laurel and I just started off rocky when she blindsided Morgan, but then we got to a good place. But again, that's not me dapping up a lady on the tribe. That's me starting off strong with another strong alpha male. So it did take a while for us to bond. Very fortunately, the three of us became like a super tight bond, and we got to the end together. And then we will get to that question, but then it's a matter of, you have two strong men and a strong woman at the end, how will the votes fall? And so we'll definitely get to that.
So Bryce, on your season, you aligned with a different Morgan. How much did gender play a role in your decision about which beautiful person fellow beautiful person to align with? And do you think, looking back, that it hurt you? Was it a good move, bad move? What do you think?
I think a lot. I think that there are a lot of nuances to gender that oftentimes it doesn't get talked about. And like for myself, I don't conform to what society says a man should be. I live outside the box. I live who I am. And it's taken me a while to get there. And so I think about my time when I was on Cagayan, and I got out to the beach and there was Jeremiah and LJ. And like Wendell was saying, him and Dom dapped up. I went to LJ and Jeremiah and I'm like, hey y'all. And they couldn't see me, right? Like they couldn't see me as a trustworthy member, a trustworthy boy, right? And I'm like, if you watch that season, we're building fire. I'm like on the ground, like getting fire. I'm like trying to like prove myself to be like, I am worthy, I am here, and they just couldn't see it. And so Morgan was a beautiful lady on my tribe, and because she was beautiful, the girls didn't necessarily trust her. Oh, she would be able to get the boys to sway her way. And so Morgan and I, we aligned, but it wasn't necessarily we wanted to align. It was because in our tribe, the society norms were set that LJ and Jeremiah were at the top, Alexis and Jeffra were together, and they aligned with them, and it kind of left Morgan and myself out. Morgan was able to see me, I was able to see her. She was smart, she was strong, and it's just really interesting, especially with these nuances, because I feel like myself going into Survivor, I feel like let me be a Taylor for a second. How many Survivor fans do we have in the building? Okay. So do we remember Colton? Okay. So in my coming up, I am a lot younger than Wendell, but for me, when I was watching Survivor, right, there wasn't a lot of representation of like gay men, and I happened to be the first gay black man to play Survivor. And so I remember going into it being like, I don't really want to be anything like what Colton was shown to be. Colton was lazy, not that he is a lazy person, but what we got to see of him wasn't great things of what a gay man should be. And me coming in as a black gay man, I'm like, I have to come, I have this thing on my back that I need to represent for. And so for me, I went out there and I was like, I want to be strong. I want to be active. I want to get up in the morning and stoke the fire. I want to get everyone water. I want to do all of these things. And it's like in reverse, it almost worked against me because Jeremiah and LJ in their mind had this idea of what a gay man should be. And I also just like to bring up that gay men go home early in the game too, and when you think about society, who do they associate gay men characteristics like? Who, like, and when it's with the boys club, like Becky was saying, I know I'm all over the place, that's just how I talk, so just help with me. Like, when Becky was talking about like the boys club and the boys society, there are so many times that Wendell happens to be my best friend, we'll go into a place, we'll speak to a manager, and I'll again show up as myself. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, we would like to do this, this, and this. And they look at me like I have a horn with 3 eyes and that like I am speaking another language. Wendell will walk in and cough. And they'll be like, hello, and we'll say the same thing, and they receive it. And so it is just these subtle nuances, specifically to gender, where it's because I don't fit what the society says. And first of all, who made up these rules? I just, I like to find
Want me to
that.
answer that?
I like to have a talk with that person.
Stereotypes about women typically center on them being emotional, and if they are assertive, they're often seen as being bossy or opinionated or a certain B word. You like that, right?
The word is there.
I didn't want to say it.
He didn't want to be that guy.
Okay, I'm not going to say it. The successful all-women alliances in Survivor have earned some pretty distinct gender stereotypical names. For example, the Black Widow Brigade in Micronesia, the Witches' Coven in Cambodia. The women who successfully execute these alliances are seen as cutthroat and angry. Eliza, why do you think the women in these successful alliances are criticized and labeled as villains instead of praised and seen as strategic?
Because misogyny. Okay. No, I'm kidding. I think it's fairly evident that, you know, a man and a woman can say the exact same thing or do the exact same thing or act in the exact same way or participate in a reality television show and go vote the same way, and it would be perceived completely differently. I mean, like Bryce was just saying, it is just not the same. I can literally say a sentence and people are like, God, what a bitch. Sorry, I'm gonna say it. Is that allowed?
It's all you.
And someone else can say it and they'll be like, yeah, what he said. Yeah, you know, and it's not the same. And so, you know, I think that women get perceived as villains because of the patriarchy, because of this society that we live in where this is not restricted to reality TV. This is universal. This is in classrooms, in courtrooms, in boardrooms across the country. This is across the world. Like, this is what exists, period. And so that's, again, why this is such an important topic. And thank you, Erin, for writing your paper, and thank you, Bryce and Ryan Mertz, for planning this. This is like, it feels good to be talking about this and to even be calling this stuff out, because it really feels as though if we want to ever get past this, that doesn't happen if we're not naming it, if we're not naming it out in public, if we're not really saying these things, because then nothing ever changes. And right now, you know, it still feels like this is pretty much the world that we live in, that we are not, that women are perceived as villains for doing the same thing that a man is perceived as powerful and strong for doing. Unless you're Parvati, and then she is a villain, so.
I'd like to give a special shout out to Big Brother Over at the Top Alliance, All Women's Alliance thing, the Ball Crushers. Love that.
But I think that there's also, you know, this thing of like, I wasn't in the All Women's Alliance on Micronesia, you know, but it doesn't make me any less of a feminist, you know, if I didn't get along with them and I got along better with Jonathan and Yao Man, and, you know, it's like, it's just, again, that is who you connect with, and there were other commonalities that put me on the outside of women's alliances.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to talking about immunity, head of household, and veto challenges. So when I tweeted about my findings regarding gender bias, almost immediately, like I freakishly fast, received replies, mostly from men, basically arguing that, you know, it's not gender bias, women are just weak.
Oh.
Okay. And so, you know, that was their rationale. Women get voted out, particularly in Survivor early because of physical weakness.
And so from there, we want to just basically start with Eliza and Becky on this one. In general, what do you think about the competitions on Survivor? I mean, we've all watched it numerous times. You know, we always know that it's going to be like a tribal, like physical immunity off the top, all the way from like Sonia in season 1. Do you think that some of this might be addressed if we maybe started with a non-physical competition? Like, do you like the spacing of the competitions, or do you think sort of a reboot is necessary?
Well, so because we were split by gender on Survivor Vanuatu, we had an element of that first challenge was the balance beam. And balance beams, you know, people think of as the great equalizer, and Chris couldn't get across, you know, who ultimately ended up winning the season. And but it was they were forced to do things that it wasn't just going to be a blowout challenge if it was just strength based. And so I think that yes, we need a reboot. We need to redo these challenges. And I would be remiss not to talk about, and I know this wasn't the subject of the paper, nor is this the subject of the panel, but I am the one panelist who has appeared on that other terrible CBS reality show that's on the brink of cancellation constantly because it's trash, The Amazing Race. Actually, you had it cut out. But you want to talk about misogyny, you want to talk about gender bias. I was on the 31st season of The Amazing Race, and up to that point, 3 teams of women had ever won the show. So you want to talk, the challenges on The Amazing Race are certainly geared towards men. It's the entire show is. But I think Survivor is often that way too, and even if the challenges are not geared towards men, because there's always a puzzle element or something else, you're perceived as weak. We had a tribe swap in Micronesia, and I was the last person selected in the pick'em, and getting picked last on the kickball field in elementary school. It's like a horrifying moment, and I was like, oh yeah, you think I'm weak? Watch me, and then proceeded to help my tribe win every single challenge from that point until the merge, except one. But it was like, I was competing against Ozzy in some of those challenges where we had to run out into the water, grab stuff, swim back, do all these things. And I was keeping up with him, and yet that perception was never there. It was like, Eliza, you're weak, you're small, you're weak, you can't compete. I won a car on my first season. It's like, you can compete in all the challenges, you can show that you're winning individual rewards, communities, and yet still the perception is that you're weak. And so, yes, they should revamp the challenges, but also revamp, the minds of all the contestants.
Maggie?
I think obviously looking at the first one that was earlier, and I think that they were a little bit more, trying to be more with effort on creating challenges that were more balanced. I know that some of the challenges that we had where, I was sharing with you, where it was about endurance, there was one where we had to stand on a pole, and based on your size of your foot, they had this sort of postcard thing that we'd stand on, and after time went by, they took pieces as proportionate to your foot size, pieces away, so you had to stand with balance. A similar one where we had to hold on to another totem pole and stay up there as, in the heat. But a lot of the sort of more teamwork ones were swimming, doing more joint activities. Again, I think they were much more careful to make sure that it wasn't just lifting and carrying things. But like you mentioned, I also think it's very interesting the way the camera would always shoot women and men in challenges. Yoel was on, he was, I think his presence and also his sort of character, every single season everyone has a different character. I was the silent bitch who made it to the end. They always showed me eating coconut with the leaf on my, in the shadow, not ever saying anything, and just like Daria, really. And then there was that one time where before Jonathan was voted off, he asked me a question about my sister, and I never stop talking. I talk when I'm sleeping. But they had the birds above my head, and that I ignored him, showing his demise seemed to mine. So I think even the way the editing was done for Women and Men, you see the camera, or even the angle for Yoel when he was on X Island, and you see the camera shot this god, and same with Ozzy, because his freak of nature who could swim like he was a fish, and so I think even with editing with the camera, it shows a difference in terms of women versus men, definitely.
So Taylor, what about Big Brother challenges? There's a kind of a variety of Big Brother challenges for the different, the head household and VOs. So does this, women's strength play a role in that? Or is there sort of a difference in challenges? Do they seem more sort of geared towards men or women? Or
It's interesting. This show has been on for 25 seasons now. And when you think of the iconic competition beast in the game, the first person I think of is Janelle, who feasted her way through her early seasons of Big Brother. Won so many competitions, but the competitions that she was winning were incredibly diversified. They were physical, they were puzzles, they were match the eyes to this person in the house. They are games that required just as much mental strength as physical strength. Now in this new era of Big Brother, we have more physical challenges. Swing across this rope, get on this gurney, not a gurney, hopefully not. Maybe one day. Like swing across this rope, carry this heavy thing, run across, run multiple times, hang on to this for your life. There's so much more physical strength involved than puzzles, or there's a combination of the two. And it's frustrating because you will watch live feeds, or you'll watch the regular show even, and you'll see people around the house saying, I just can't win a competition. This one person, Jag, this season, who was evicted, brought back into the house, and is basically winning out through the end of the season, it's because his build favors these competitions. And it'd be one thing if other people in the house were saying, I was so close, or I'm so capable. They're saying, I don't even have a chance. And I have to keep dealing with this guy and his power, his one power. I look at Big Brother as a social game first, but a tool to achieve social capital in that game is to win competitions. And so many women are put in a position, like I was, where if you're not consistently winning competitions, you have to play a game from the bottom and work your way up socially. And there are many different ways you can play the game socially. So when I think about these competitions, I also think about what do we define as strength and weakness. And I even hear it myself, and on this panel today, we keep saying, well, if you're a strong woman, if you're a strong woman, what does that really mean? Because if we think about the season I was on, I was tested emotionally, nearly tormented in that house for 82 days. You can't tell me I'm fucking weak going through that house. And then I also think about one of the most iconic competitions that I won, The Wall, where you're getting water, pain, air, crazy things throwing at you while you're gripping for your life and holding on. I'm the one that won the competition, not any of these strong guys. So I think we have to stop thinking about what it means, and maybe it varies for the games that we play, but we have to stop thinking about what it means to be strong or weak, because those can be manifested and shown in so many different ways. The competitions themselves, I'm always going to advocate for more equitable competitions, because it can always be better. We should always be striving to make it more equitable. But also we need to be shifting the idea of what strength means and how we can attain that.
Bryce and Wendell, Bryce, I'm going to start with you, but can we change that perception? And what I mean by that is, it gets to a point where if somebody is not pulling their weight physically, and if you're like a man on the challenge in a physical challenge, oh, he's weak, he's dragging down the team. And then similarly, that puts all of the intellectual or the puzzle challenges, the weight of that is almost always put on the woman. Oh, she didn't pull through, she couldn't do the puzzle, you told us you could do the puzzle. Is there a way that we can address that, or does it again require fundamental change to change and break that perception?
I think that it's both ways, right? I think that, again, having more panels, having more articles and talking about it, and really kind of getting the word out, because there are biases that we have. Everyone has bias, right? Some are unconscious, some are conscious. And if we demonize them, if we don't talk about it, if we don't have a forum to have a place that we can explain what's going on, I think that it will continue. I also think, similar to what Taylor was saying, what defines weak and what defines strong? I think that when we look at these challenges and we see a swimming challenge and we see different things that, sure, that you can be strong at swimming, but there are so many other things and so many other aspects that can be visible that could change the game. Because me personally, I feel like, how about we do a competition of who could stay in their bed for a weekend and binge watch something on Netflix, because I would be a winner of something, but but I think, again, but who determines this social narrative of strong, right? And I think that that's really kind of this common theme that we continue to see. And I think that CBS has done a good job of listening, right? And I think that it's not about calling them out and saying, oh, this has been such a horrible experience. It's more about calling them in again and saying, hey, it's time that we take a look at this. It makes me wonder, in my head I have an idea, but who's creating these challenges, do you think? I wonder, and what it would look like if we were to have, different shapes, sizes, and people creating these challenges, what that would look like. It's really kind of my thoughts on it.
And Wendell, along the same lines, but I wanted to sort of find out from you that what Bryce is touching on here, where we've entered into this like phase of reality where it's become very competition heavy. We saw it on 45 with Brandon. You're not bringing anything. You know, you told us you could do this, you can do the challenge. Like, is this really now not so much a social construct show, but if you can't do it like honestly the challenge show, like if you can't perform in the challenges, what are you doing here? And is that what Survivor and Big Brother have become?
Please, yeah.
I think that was the point of my speech in the end. If anyone is familiar, I talked about we can, it's weird to quote myself, but I said we can have the same winner where competitions and evictions are the focus of what gets you the win. But let's shift that perspective and define a new era of what winning these competition shows means. And it is social. Like, piecing your way out can't be the only answer.
Right. I agree with that. I also think that it's easy to show, from a production standpoint, it's easy to show on TV these big moves, right? And then as a viewer, that looks like, oh, these particular people are doing so much. It's a lot more difficult to communicate that these players are forming these bonds or doing something different. It's in what was an hour-long show, which is really 42 minutes. Now, very fortunately, we have 90-minute episodes. We can get a little more camp life and other things. But I just think that over 2 decades of big moves being like the thing to win in Survivor, when you have that and then you have production wanting to see those moves because it makes for great TV moments, because at the end of the day, we're making a TV show. And also, when you sit at the end of the game and can point to a couple big moves that you made on your resume throughout the game, now the jury might reward that more so than someone that might have been a more gentle player or made different moves that aren't necessarily, I can carry something big and heavy out of the water. So I think the way to remedy this, some of the challenges, yes, you'll go through the water and do all these things, and then it'll end with a puzzle. And sometimes the puzzles are true equalizers. They might take a half hour, while running through the water took 10 minutes. But I think it is, like Bryce said, about continuing the conversations, continuing the narratives, pointing things out, calling, I think CBS, I think Survivor, I think Jeff Probst, they listen when you say things, but you guys say things kind of like, you know, the right way. You don't want to just tweet and yell at, or X, what do you call it, Marks?
X, yeah.
You don't want to just X and yell at people.
Posting.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
I'm showing my age, Bryce.
Yes, you are.
You don't want to just yell at people. I think that the way to solve anything is always by dialogue and like staring things in the face and talking through things and understanding different perspectives. And even me sitting on this panel, I'm learning so much from these dynamic, incredible women and Bryce. And yeah, I think that he's all right. I think that there's a way that we can get CBS to listen to us, because I do think that they listen over time.
And there's precedent with the diversity campaign.
Yes. In 2020 we did it. We had a huge diversity initiative to change it so that like minorities aren't otherized as soon as they get on the island. Now it's 50% BIPOC every season. So, you know, we have more incredible winners or more opportunities for more winners. So if we continue to do things like this and make incredible articles and just continue the conversation, keep knocking on that door, I think they will listen.
I think we also have to talk about who's in power, who actually has control of the edit, the production. And so, for example, as a male in this panel, calling our allies in, right? Because also we need you sometimes to open the door for us to get in there. So I think that's a big piece too.
And I think that what Becky points out is critical. You know, Jeff Probst is an executive producer now. He wasn't always, but it is an all-male executive producer run show. So as much as we have diversity, it is all white men, I should say. It is not just all men, it is all white men who are at the highest levels of Survivor. So while it has made a huge difference in the diversity, initiative, right when it was, I think it was the day after we announced that we were doing this panel, Dalton Ross put up an Entertainment Weekly article about gender, about the problems, the gender problems, the like gender inequity, especially when it comes to women on Survivor. And Jeff said, I don't think we have enough data. And he was like, I don't think we can make this call yet. We've only had, 4 seasons in the new era or something like that. And I was like, Jeff, we have 45 seasons of data. Like, what do you mean there's not enough?
Yeah, we yelled at on Twitter.
So while calling him in, I do think that there's a benefit to that, and I hope that the Big Brother producers especially realize what an absolute travesty the competitions have been this season. I think that there is an element of like failing to recognize that, especially on Jeff's part, being like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's fine.
Someone email him my paper, please. So one of the things that I looked for when I was doing this paper was potential explanations for why we were seeing this discrepancy in female winners and female first boots. And so I looked at the number of individual immunity challenges post-merge, right? So when people are competing as individuals. And so there was actually no gender differences. So men, even though they weren't identical number of wins for men and women, there was really no meaningful difference between the number that men and women had won in the first 40 seasons, which was kind of surprising. And so we couldn't really look at immunity challenges as like an explanation for why we're seeing this bias, because there was no, they were equal. And then I also had, you probably know this now, but I had UD students. I showed them all of your pictures and then had them rate you on a bunch of different characteristics. And so, yes, each of you have an average score on many things. And so, 2 of the things that we looked at was perceived intelligence and perceived physical strength. And so when we looked at the averages for male and female contestants, there was no difference in perceived physical strength. And so we used your cast photos to just see that first impression. And so, we're finding no difference in these things that people claim are meaningful in terms of bias voting. But it's not really a viable explanation. And so, but as long as this women equals weak, whatever that means, persists, then women are less likely to make it far in these kinds of games.
And when women do make it far, I think the next topic that we want to talk about is how hard the path is to win. And Becky, we want you to sort of open this topic up. At first, I was going to introduce what happened at your final tribal council with all the votes and who voted for you, but I'll just let you tell the story and what you think about it.
So my season was the first, I was the first third place person, and with 4 tribes, 5 in each, getting to the end and having 3 in the final. So in terms of, doing strategy with math and figuring out alliances, but for me, a big piece of this, as I've sort of alluded to, is talking about that really strong alliance from the very beginning with Yul. And as you're talking about, what shows a good, strong competitor, and often he, just in the way he was fair, we all thought he was the one to divide up our peanut butter evenly. He was seen very much like the person that he is, very just, very fair, and I think also too, in terms of looking at strategy and what shows good on television, in terms of the moves being made to get as far as you can go. You're not going to, you can't show mental game. You can't show, in terms of the decisions on how you choose on, who you vote out. And so I think a lot of that, in comparison to obviously Ozzy, the athletic sort of god, it was very hard to show that. I think in the sense of that, for me too, and also like you mentioned about the edit, I think I already had a role. Every single week when I was watching, on Thursdays when it was, I literally was watching not knowing how they would show me, how they would depict me. We had certain arcs with Jonathan, with Candace and Adam, even in terms of some of the different things that were going on with the different tribes, but I was, I actually was a little bit depressed during my season watching that live, because I really didn't feel like my edit was who I was. you know, how I played it, but I needed to play a role for what they needed for the show, right? Because as many of you know, with editing, the end is, you know, sort of the end, they knew what's happening, but then also to get to that path. And so that's sort of where I sort of was, you know, and you don't talk about hindsight, because then you see, you know, how decisions were made, even with the vote with Cowboy and looking at, you know, in terms of the numbers at the end. But that was something for me that really, I think that was very surprising, but also too, as you can probably tell, most of us, we're all personality A, go-getters, and to not be able to have that control, even though the game that you play is something that you think in the circumstances at the time, this is what my cards are here, and I know that these are the moves I can make to get as far as I can go. And so that was personally very, very disappointing for me.
So Wendell, in your final for Ghost Island, where
We don't talk about
we don't
the
talk
other
about
one.
it anymore. You sat next to Dom and Laurel, and at the final tribal council, and it was a pretty epic final tribal council. So it was the first time ever there was a tie vote, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that it was not tied between Wendell and Laurel. And so you and Dom had tied votes, and Laurel received 0 votes, and she ultimately had to cast the tie-breaking vote in the game, and she chose you to win. So do you think if the roles were reversed and Laurel played your game and you played her game, the votes would have been different?
First of all, I attribute Laurel to us all getting to the end. If not for her, we wouldn't have gotten to the end. She was so good. She came from the Malolo tribe, so she had ins there, so she can essentially like spy for us while we spy within the Navidi tribe, you know, and we can share information. And so she's the reason why, she is a very strong reason why Dom and I got to the end. I will always say that because, like, despite her getting 0 votes, she played a great game. If you look at the games that we played, Dom played a more kind of in-your-face, aggressive, big moves kind of game, and I played what a lot of people perceive to be like a social game with some pretty solid big moves as well. And the way I look at Laurel's game is she was able to win an individual immunity. She did very well in immunity challenges while we were a tribe. She is the most brilliant person on the island. She has a Yale degree. She's brilliant, and she was able to work amongst different people and bring information to us, saving us many times. And if I were to play that game, and if she were to play my, I guess you'd say, more social and stronger aggressive game, I think that she would have gotten more votes than 0. I think that I would have gotten less votes than 5. I think we would have split votes, you know? And then I think Dom would have won because he got 5 votes. So I think that's how that would have won.
Eliza, how much do you think a person's overall game is perceived by the jury? How much of a role does gender play into that? Like, are they just like, okay, well, it's a man and a woman, like, does the gender factor play a role on it? Like, you've been on the jury, like, does that play a role at all, or not really? It's just solely about the game?
Well, so I'm a 2-time juror, and 3-time loser on reality television, 1-time loser in an election, so big loser right here. But exactly, keep fighting. But in one of my finals was between 2 women, so that one is not as relevant to address right here. But the other one was between a man and a woman, and I think the fascinating thing was I got up there and I really reamed into both of them. Bring back jury speeches. Uncontroversial opinion. But I really reamed into both of them, and I asked them both to apologize to me for the ways in which they had wronged me throughout the game that I felt. And Twyla, who you all may remember, was like, well, why should I apologize to you if you don't want to apologize to me? You're a spoiled, rotten little child. And I was like, what? You want my vote for $1 million? You can't even say sorry? You lied on your son's life. Like, oh, this is insane. So obviously it wasn't gendered in that moment for me because Chris with a lot of contrition was like, here's how I wronged you, I genuinely apologize, I really, did this thing, and I did it so that I would get to the end, so that I could win this game, and I was playing really hard, and I'm sorry. And so in that moment, it was, for me, and a pretty easy call. However, in hindsight, with almost 2 decades of hindsight, looking back at it, I think in a lot of ways, Twyla was seen as unlikable. I also was seen as unlikable, and is that perception because of our gender? And I think in so many ways now I have the experience, having run for office, this permeates politics in like a really major way, where women are seen for speaking up as unlikable. They're seen as aggressive. They're asked to apologize for things that, I do think Twyla should have been sorry. She was really awful to me. But, women are asked to apologize for things that they shouldn't be sorry for. And so I have to mention this because I am in Ohio and a very critical election is coming up, and you all have vote yes on issue 1. You could be the strongest state on women's rights anywhere in this country, protect reproductive rights for women, and legalize marijuana too. Issue 2. So I know that one's less relevant to this panel, but I have to, justice-related topics are kind of my thing. But I do think that gender absolutely plays a role, and that people, have to, women are expected to speak in a certain way or act in a certain way, or, Taylor's speech in the finals, especially being up against a man, I'm sure you're gonna speak to that. Like, she's expected to kind of perform in a certain way and argue in a certain way, and that definitely has an impact on the game, as we've seen, throughout the history of Survivor.
So when we think about winning these games, you can look at it a couple of different ways, and so of course we did in our paper. We looked at the number of just male versus female winners of each show, and so here's some of the data for both Survivor and Big Brother. Again, that blue bar across each chart is where things would be if things were about equal, right, between men and women winning the game. For Big Brother, there's been 8 women who've won and 16 men. For Survivor, there's about 10 men have 10 more wins over the seasons than women. But not even that, they also, if you look at the number of votes men and women get when they're sitting together in the finals, women overall get fewer votes. So when it's like, if it's a man and even when when women win, men typically get some votes. But when men win, women often get 0. And so we found this pattern to be pretty consistent. And so kind of inconsistent with this though, Taylor, you basically destroyed Monty and won 8-1. So, which really goes against the grain with what we have seen. So what do you think it was about your season, the dynamics, that really led to this, an exception in this pattern?
I'm feeling emotions, so 8 is my lucky number, so to be the 8th woman to win and win in an 8-1 vote, and there's a lot of other odd, $800,000, like a lot of odd ways that 8 played into the win as well. But I think specifically about the anomaly that is season 24 Big Brother. And I think if you run that in a simulator 100 times, I'm in the bottom 25 percentile of winning the thing over and over, because you have the recipe of strong men that will have a men's alliance to protect each other and have the respect of winning competitions, having the majority of competitions under them, giving a dry, boring speech. Can we talk about how boring Big Brother speeches are? And then winning. There's no real road to the end outside of just being in the house, winning competitions and then picking people. And I remember feeling so devastated when I lost part 2 of the final head of household competition, because it meant so much to me to be a woman that could have been in a position to take myself to the final 2 seed. And when I lost that, I was leaving my destiny into the social game, which is what women have to play more than men have to play. I was leaving my destiny up to two bros that had an alliance together and had a history of protecting each other throughout the entire game, from when we were all in the leftovers together to the end. But it gave me the opportunity to, instead of studying for that final competition, I could sit by myself and think about what I wanted my final speech to be. And that's when I sat there with two ciders that I should not have had, but maybe it worked. And I just thought, what is the value in telling the story of a journey of playing Big Brother? Do I think that telling a story is as valuable in shorter games? Maybe not so much. But when you have an up to 90-day game, I think it is easier to argue for the legitimacy of playing a long-term social strategic game. And I sat there and I said, okay, well, this game does not have to be about winning competitions, evicting people. If that's what it is, just go to the challenge. Go somewhere else where that is a faster pace. There is more power in letting someone stand up and say, I won this, and I evicted this, and I made this big move, and going after that person, me following that person and saying, you did this because of me. You made that decision because of me. I loaded the gun, I cocked the gun, I put it in your hand, and I told you when to shoot. There's more power, there's more strength in doing that. And I think so often the difficulty of the way these shows are edited is that the audience can't see that. I'm lucky to have had live feeds to narrate that. I'm lucky to have had the psycho fan base of Big Brother. I love y'all crazy. But I'm lucky to have had the live feeders push back against that story when it was told in the episodes, because as we got to the end game and it looked more and more like Monty would pull out a classic win, the episode started to favor his journey more than mine. So I'm glad for the people that advocated for me when I couldn't do it for myself, because I was in the house and not watching it in real time. I think also jury management is such a crucial component to these games. And I was doing everything with the jury, from showing them that I was a human being that they could love and trust, and making sure that my strongest allies, when they walked out the door, they still loved me and would advocate for me on that jury. That's Michael, Joseph, Brittany, when she eventually got there, were able to go to the people that they were closest with, that I didn't have strong relationships, and push them to see the value of the game that I had to play because of the position they put me in. You know, I think there's so much in telling people about themselves and then inviting them in. You don't push people, you don't alienate people, you say, hey, this is how you wronged me, but you can be part of making it right. So when you make these games, I know I'm long-winded, y'all, when you make these games mean more than what they have meant, and you invite people in, I challenge you to change the course of this game. Be part of something bigger with me. This is not just me being the face of the season or whatever you want to say now. It's all of us collectively. This is your redemption just as much as it is mine. That is transformative enough to shift that vote from maybe a 5-4 split or something even closer or wider to 8-1. And Monty's one vote being the person that was his closest ally to the end game. So I'm particularly proud of what that vote meant. I'm particularly proud to have had a female-dominant jury, but the people who were advocating for me on that jury, people that hated for me the most on that jury, were the other women. And it was the men that joined that jury that shifted the mind. So I'm just very proud of the ways that this is an anomaly, and I hope to see that it'll affect change as we move forward.
Oftentimes, likability is cited as something jurors value. In fact, if you think about Gabler beating Cassidy, a lot of them cited his likability and his social gameplay. Bryce, do you think that being likable is something that is harder for women to achieve, not because they are less likable, but because of gender stereotypes about women?
1,000%. I feel like Survivor has example after example after example. I think Survivor China with Sharia. She was an amazing player. Loved watching her on the season, but seeing how her tribe felt about her, oh, she was too aggressive, they thought this and that. Absolutely, I think it's easier for straight white man to be liked in these type of settings other than someone that's not that, right? So, I mean, I come from a single mother home, so it's like, I see the beauty, I wanna be a part of the change, I wanna support it, and so for me, it's a no-brainer, but absolutely, I think we see it time and time again.
It also bleeds into other shows. Like I was telling Aaron earlier, there was a whole theory about American Idol where they had a string of like 10, like they used to call it like white guys with a guitar, and it didn't matter like who was on against them, they got the win. So I think we're touching upon something that also plays out on like on voting shows versus just competition.
Okay, so the next section that we're gonna move to is, where do we go from here? Right, we've talked about gender biases. It emerges in many different facets of this game, from potentially casting all the way through production and editing. And so I was talking with one of my colleagues about this paper after it came out, describing the results, and they said to me, "Well, do you still watch the show?" And I mean, this person didn't know me very well, and I said, "Why wouldn't I? Of course I do." These shows are, it would never occur to me to stop watching the show because of this paper, because what we're seeing on these shows, it's a microcosm of life. And so it's happening, whatever the things we see happening, unfolding in front of us in 39 days are things that happen to women every day, right? So, we really have to sort of let that sink in, that it's nothing new, unfortunately.
So we're now going on more than 2 decades of these shows. I remember how much hair I had at the first Survivor finale. And as these shows show no sign of stopping, I guess where we want to go now is there was always a suspicion that there might be a gender bias. Like, why don't the women win? Like, it was a conversation that we would have even in the early finales. But now, thanks to Erin and her team, there's actual data to support it. So the question is, where do we go from here? What message do you want people to take away that are both here in the audience live and the ones that will be watching the video later? Like, what is the takeaway? We're gonna start with Becky.
Well, similar to what I said before about, we need to look at who's behind the scenes, who's in production, who has the control of the mic, who has control of the pen, and
We just need you in the mic because everyone wants to hear.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
Wrong person, girl.
So I think that in terms of, where's the so what, right? All this information, so similar as we were talking about before, even in the game, is finding the right alliances and calling the people that we know are the people that, you mentioned you had the question about, it's how you say things. Well, if I say the same thing, Jeff Purpose, you say the same thing, how is it received? And so I think if we're trying to go in with a collaborative, maybe more open-ended and saying, like, we can all benefit from this collaborative, effort, but also too, we have to get to the people who have the power, right, to be able to change the status quo. But I also think a big part is like you mentioned, saying like no data. We obviously have the data, so you have to get that data to the people in a way that's going to not, make them feel like they have to and be forced. Why this actually is very, very close to what I do is domestic violence is a very big problem, right? And that's my area of work. And for a very long time, we see domestic violence if you are, whatever strata, and obviously it does not discriminate. There has been a huge problem, obviously, with athletes in the last 10, 15 years who have not been held accountable for the crime. And under the NFLPA, but also NFL, there was a lot of work done from experts creating these sort of handbooks on how can we do make changes in creating accountability. And then we're asked to basically create these 2 big encyclopedias. That information was handed over, but nothing was ever done with it. And so I think the same way here, we have this data, we have this opportunity, we have these, these sort of forums where we're calling it out, but then the people that should be in the room, right? The people that have that power to make a change, we need to get that information to them, but also invite them to be part of that change. Because I think also too, it's not saying like, this is bad and it's your fault, more so saying like, this will benefit all of us, right? By changing what's happening. And also, when people say like, oh, good, I'm not seeing that. Well, obviously if they're the majority, they're not going to see it, right? So I think that's a key part.
Anyone else, like a takeaway from today that you sort of hope elicits the kind of change that we're looking for?
So when we talk about the difference between Survivor and Big Brother, I know Survivor, you're isolated, literally on an island, y'all are crazy, I get that, but Big Brother, it's literally the core of the show is surveillance. And there is no interference. I mean, truly no interference. Jeff is yelling at y'all in your competitions like, oh, you just fell, what are you gonna do about it? Just shut the fuck up. I couldn't do it. Talking about my game in a tribal, oh, no, you can shut that mouth, sorry, Jeff, whatever.
We love you, Jeff, we love you.
I don't know, man. So, but with Big Brother, it's literally surveillance. And people ask me all the time, Taylor, what do you think Big Brother should do to prevent isolation and bullying against you for future players? And I'm like, you know, I went into the show understanding that this wasn't just about my experience, it's about the way that the world is seeing everything happen in real time. I don't want you to intervene because I don't have to prove the point. I am the point just by existing here and letting you all see it happen. And if by signing up for this reality show and enduring this experience is what it takes, I've signed that 72-page contract. I know what I'm getting into. And it's my responsibility to communicate the lessons that we can learn from that experience. Now, I was prepared for the worst experience. I didn't want to go through the worst experience, but I was prepared for it. And now I know how to talk about it. So when we talk about what do we change about Big Brother, how we make it more equitable, I think it does truly come down to the competitions. Because that's really the only space where Big Brother can impact the structure of the game to make it equitable. But biases, perceptions, stereotypes, people from all different walks of life are going to walk into the game of Big Brother playing those. And I think it's the responsibility of the house guests in the way that I did to reframe the narrative, challenge people's perceptions, and put them in a position to either double down in the wrongness or say, you know what, no, I can make a change here. When it comes to Survivor, I think it's more involved. I think there's more things that can be manipulated within the game, but with Big Brother, to do anything more than that is to directly negate the core identity of it.
So I would say, for the takeaway for this panel, I would challenge everyone in this room. You know, there is no silver bullet. We can't just snap our fingers and say, let's address gender inequity in reality TV when gender inequity exists in the world. And so I would challenge everyone here, if you have a moment, whether you're a man or a woman or non-binary, it doesn't matter. You know, it's just, if you have a moment of hearing a woman say something and your initial reaction is to bristle and say, she's a bitch, or that was so unlikable, oh, she's being aggressive. I would challenge everyone here to challenge yourself, to look internally and say, oh wow, is that my own internalized misogyny? Is that my own unconscious bias that is causing me to have this reaction to a woman just existing in the world? Would I have that reaction if a man did something similar? And so I think that the takeaway from this panel shouldn't just be, you know, how do we change Survivor and Big Brother? It should be really, how do we kind of bring this out into the world and really like kind of broaden this and try to make an impact in our lives. You know, the RFK quote, the ripples of hope, you know, and it's like every day, hope is a discipline. And every day you have to wake up and truly believe that you can make a difference just as an individual and just try to continue to help people and to fight to make the world a better place.
I also agree that a takeaway from this should be that seeing the amazing panel, be yourself. I know society says that this is what something should be, this is what something, we don't listen to that. Be who you want to be. Support your family members that are walking out on faith and doing things that maybe society doesn't agree with. Love on them, support them, listen to them. I think really honestly is the bigger takeaway. Yes, we need to get in these executive rooms and people need to hear them, but it starts with you. It can start with your sister, your brother, them, they. It could start with whoever, and I think that honestly is really the true takeaway.
I think everyone said everything very well. I was gonna Eliza's speech, incredible. I think everyone did a really great job. I think the thing I'll stress is the importance of allyship. If you see people fighting a fight that might be different than you, stand by them. People are different than you, so you might not know their plight, you might not know what they've been through, but it's so important to have allies, and I think that's what we all try to continue to be, no matter the struggle. So we will keep on knocking at CBS's door. We will keep on bringing these things up, and I'm willing to bet that we'll see change. I really think we will.
So we've been talking about gender bias, basically in terms of women being seen or evaluated as worse than, like if this is like neutral, women are underperforming, right? Women are weaker. But bias can also emerge by basically seeing men more positively than, frankly, they should be, right? So maybe women are here at the neutral pace, and then we're just seeing men as like with the halo, right? The halo effect of like, the Yule looking up at the godlike creature. So Wendell, do you think that the gender bias that we're seeing in these shows is more due to women being valued more negatively than they should be, or men being evaluated more positively than they should be?
I think it's a push in both directions. Because if you have a woman do something that is the same thing that a man does, I think they will be discounted or viewed as something like aggressive, whereas a man might be viewed as something like a great game player, strong player. And so, yeah, I think it's both. It's pushing women down and pushing men up.
And Taylor, starting with your win, do you feel like we're on the path to maybe things changing, or are there a lot of steps to go?
I'd like to think so. And just going directly to the question that was asked of Wendell, I was involved in 2 showmances, essentially. But it takes 2 people to participate in those. And I remember in the later end of the game with Monty, I would tell him, like, you cannot tell anybody about this. We can't, like, this cannot be game. This is not game. And if word gets to the jury, if word gets throughout the house, I know the way that the conversation is going to become slut-shaming, the way that anything that I could have done in this game, and we had conversations about what it would mean to be 2 strong competitive games to the end together. I said any of that is instantly devalued. Kind of gave him some ammo to work against me. It didn't work, thankfully, but I just know that if a showmance is moving forward together in a game, the man is going to get more credit for forging the path forward than the woman is. And it's incredibly frustrating. And I like to believe that because I was in an endgame showmance with my showmance partner and beat him 8-1, there is the ability to see beyond partner or physicality, sexuality, whatever that is, in a negative light towards women. But again, I am one person who did that. I actually don't know if this is true, but I might have been the only person to have been sitting next to my showmance partner in the end and beat that person at the end, who was a man. And that's mind-boggling to me. But again, it all goes back to the gender bias that we have around how you play the game and what ways you are allowed to play the game. I remember there was an interesting conversation that happened on the live feeds of this season talking about my showmance. And they said, one person said, yeah, Taylor slept her way to the end so she could win the money. And another person, who was actually a man in the house, checked him and said, what do you mean? She actually won, so don't you think that he slept with her so he could get to the end and win the money? And I appreciate that, and I appreciate that that came from a man, because the conversation does not end that way. And I see it all the time when I open up Twitter or my DM still. I'm single as hell, and I still get, you extra way to get the money. And I was like, okay, well, it's in my account, so if you want to believe that, go ahead. That's not what happened. But this constant narrative of who is allowed to have a connection like that and be rewarded for it is something that we consistently see being worked against women when the man and the woman are on the equal playing field. It's got to stop, and I would like to believe that it'll end with my win moving forward. And honestly, now I'm up my pencil over here. Honestly, I do want to see somebody be like, I am hooking up this person so I can get to the end and then discard them. So then they'll be like, and now what? And now what? Jeez. Steven, let me see what happened.
So, in between U.S. Survivor seasons, this past year I watched the Heroes vs. Villains seasons of Survivor Australia. And there's a scene in one of the episodes that really stood out to me. I don't know how many of you have watched it. It's great. You should watch it. But it's George and Liz are talking about who they want to move forward with in an alliance. And George starts, rattling off all these names of men. And, shocking, right? And Liz says to him, what about women? We want women to move forward too. We want a handful of women coming with us to the next part of this game. Otherwise, she called it out, there's gonna be no women in this game except potentially her. And then as a result, women, they sort of reconfigured who they wanted to bring forward with them in their alliance. And so, Bryce, how much do you think men and women should be intentional about reducing gender bias in these games? Do you think there's room for that in a game? Because again, you're playing for a lot of money. And is there room for being intentional about not perpetuating this gender bias when you're competing for a lot of money?
I think these games are very cutthroat and it is a lot of money. I do believe that there is a world that we can reduce the gender bias and still play a fair and equitable game. I think that we don't see it as much, but I think it starts from conversations like this. It starts from the articles that come out of UD. It comes from, articles from Dalton Ross. I think that there definitely is a world, and I think society sets the standard, and I think that we need to hold them accountable.
And it's also a fine line too, referring to that George and Liz scene in Survivor Australia, you don't want the woman to be carried in just because she's a woman. So I think it's about changing the narrative overall, not just, we're gonna take her along so that we can equate these numbers, because I'm sure they wouldn't want to be taken that way, right? Yeah. You see my point though, right? In that scene, he's Liz was saying to him, we got to bring these women along so that we have an equal number, which there is a point to that, to sort of change the narrative of how the game is played, but at the same time, you don't want them to be carried just because of their gender. Wendell, what do you think? Is there a way to toe that line, or is it more about changing societal perceptions first and then the game? You get the big questions.
Yeah. I think you can do things in the game intentionally that can help change society. And I think, I'm big on the whole, bridging gaps in the game. I remember on Winners at War, I talked to Sarah Lacina, Officer Sarah Lacina, as a black man, about what it's like being a black man living in a city, and relations with police. And from her perspective, she explained to me that in her smaller area and department, officers get reprimanded for doing things like using profanity. In Philly, if you see an officer, that's probably the way, Eliza, I know this is a hot button topic for you.
All cops are bastards.
I
mean, every last one of them.
Okay.
Sarah Lacina's at the top of the list. You started it, Wendy.
So here's, okay, Eliza, I'm sorry, Eliza, let's do earmuffs for a second. What I wanted to do on that season was, because I've experienced all these things with police officers, I wanted to use that as a moment to talk to an ally of mine in the game. And because we were at that point working together in the game, and open up the lines of communication. So I told her my experience and how I've been pulled over in my parents' driveway before, or in my high school before, or all many places around my neighborhood. And she told me what it's like to be an officer in her position and in her department. And I thought that would be great for America to see, so that they can kind of humanize both sides to, I guess, demographics that might not see both sides. Unfortunately, that didn't make the edit. I was just a part of Michelle's edit, and I was it was, my character on season 40 was a little different, but I think that, and I might be taking a tangent, I think that there are things that we can do on the show that hopefully make TV, that can hopefully show what is a pretty divided country, that people can come together and work together.
So, but I will say that Sarah Lucina went on
Earmuffs.
Winners at War.
Earmuffs.
Went on Winners at War they filmed in 2019, right? And then in 2020, she still, during the George Floyd protests, went and tweeted some despicable, disgusting things. And we can't, I think that being allies with people or trying to build bridges with people who don't believe in our humanity is not worthwhile. And, you know, maybe I stand alone in that, but like, I don't stand for that. And the way that she talks about people, the way is unacceptable.
You don't stand alone, Eliza. I think that the only way we can change a Sarah Lucina is by talking to her. And
Agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree. I love you.
Okay, so,
You could go on Big Brother and have the conversation on the live feeds.
okay, so we're gonna move on to some audience question and answers. There's lots of questions on the Bryson Wendell post. So the first question that we're gonna go with is from Greg. He asked this question of Becky, Bryce, and Eliza. When themes are bestowed on the season by Jeff or production, like men versus women, young versus old, race versus race, etc., beauty, blonde braids, how do you think that plays a part in the decisions that are made, if at all?
Well, certainly in a season where you're on a tribe of all women, you have to vote women out, but you have to make alliances with women, and you have to, so obviously it plays a role in that regard. And then, there's the swap, and then there were people who were using their femininity, Julie Berry, to kind of bring in men and make sure that she kept herself safe. I know, she crushed it. And then, came back and then had to backstab them, which was awesome. But I think that, of course, it has an impact in a split by gender. Becky can speak to split by race.
I mean, we were so scared. I was like, oh my goodness, they're gonna make fun of everything we do. If you saw my season, the first episode, we're all on the boat, and then we get divided up into our tribes, we jump off, and then they tell us to row to your island. I mean, the Asians, the stereotype, we're all mathematical, very smart, we're organized. We had all our things stacked, and we were counting like in a three-legged race, like 1, 2, 1, so perfect. And there are some other stereotypes that are made about other races, and so. But obviously too, we don't know this at the time, right? Because obviously it's the filming it, and you don't see it until later. But I mean, I was really scared. We were like, oh my goodness, let's just be very careful. So it also made us, I think, all because we also then you meet everyone else who's also on the show, and so you're like, oh, they're very specific about people that they picked. At least they tried, right? No one crazy. That's when But at the same time too, we were only divided like that for I think 5 days. And then going into sort of the mix, but when you're finding water with somebody, when you're having some of these most you're starving, you're breaking down because of other things that are going on like in your life, you create those bonds. But definitely it created. We were very hesitant to be ourselves. Very, very, very scared. Like, oh my gosh, I'm on reality television. Oh my gosh, what are they going to show about this scenario? And so. I think that's probably why one of the first sort of interactions I had with Cowboy when he was doing this crazy dance, like a voodoo thing, puts on Brad, like I'm gonna solve your headache by doing this, and I was like, can you just be normal and not be so extra, be they're gonna make fun of us, and especially with all the different stereotypes out there, and we're on reality television. We also know that people in this country, many people see reality television as the real world, right? So we were very scared, and I think that was a big part of our strategy and how we were playing, because we were very cautious. Yeah.
Moving to the next question, it's going to be, unless somebody had something to say? No, go ahead, we're going.
Let's get these questions.
Yeah, there's a lot. Okay, so the next one is for Taylor. Amberly Jeanette asks, we've discussed how gender bias influences alliances and the outcomes of the competitions. I'm curious if Taylor feels like there's also gender bias with production that comes out in the edit.
I say this with a lot of love because I was not able to. Also, hi, where are you? Hi. So thank you for the question. I've realized this over the past year. I have stronger relationships with the production team because I could not I was looking forward to the opportunity to make strong relationships in the house. So I'm just very grateful to the production team because they were the first ones to treat me like a human being. Okay, so I still keep in touch with them. I think they're amazing people, and I've heard them say they take responsibility and they acknowledge like there's only so much time that we have to get these stories out there. And when you are building an airplane as it's flying, it's really hard to predict what direction things are going to go in. And you could already have the plane finally put together as it's about to fly into the live episode, and then the plan can totally change. And as it's air, you're trying to figure out how do we pick up the story to show all the work this other person is doing. But the next episode is a competition-heavy one, so there's no space to push it in there. So it's something that I know that production struggles with. It's something that I think inherently, now we're talking more about competitions favoring men more, the competitions take up so much of the show just because of the structure of the show. When you have to tell those stories, it is frustrating for them to say, oh my God, like we have so much gold with all the work that was happening socially in this game, but this is a veto episode. And I physically cannot put in all of this work in juxtaposition to the 2-hour-long competition that just happened. So I know it's something that they struggle with. I know it's something that they want to change and push to change. But the literal mechanics of the game make it difficult for that to happen. Again, that's not to absolve them for any responsibility, but it's to acknowledge that the job is harder than we think it is, and it is so much easier for all of us to say, you need to work on this edit, you need to change this. And we're like, but my job responsibilities require me to do this, and my morals are also trying to get me to do more. So I don't want to take away acknowledging that these people genuinely are trying. And maybe I am talking softer about it because I feel very personally connected to these people. They acknowledge the gender discrepancies, the race discrepancies that are in their teams. And I'm glad, I can't reveal too much about these people, but I know that there are people who are coming up after having worked X amount of years. Now it's their turn to be promoted into positions of power, and it's even more diverse now. So I'm excited, and I'm in a position of privilege to know who these people are. But when you're playing this game, it's literally a microphone, and I'm like looking into a light. There's no person that I see, it's just a camera and a microphone. So look, I can tell by speech patterns what they probably look like. But in theory, you don't actually know who you're talking to or what their biases are. But the long and short of the answer is yes, but they're also aware. So I can appreciate that.
Our next / last question comes from Ruth. And so now that the new era is 26 days versus 39, do you, Bryce, do you think that, so we've seen 2 men, 2 women win so far, at least 4 seasons of 26 days. Bryce, do you think that the truncated amount of time that the game's lasting impacts seeing a more balanced set of winners, essentially post 40?
I feel that between 39 and 26, my personal take is 9 days is harder. But that's not long, I was on the 9 days is harder, okay? I definitely think it can impact it. I don't know, because I feel like I'm in the Survivor X world's comments, Twitter, and there's a rift where some fans feel like 37 days is harder, some fans feel like 26 days is harder.
Right, because some people are wrong.
Well, but dare I say that if the 39 days is a more physical strength to get through, and 26 days is a more social, then maybe it could lend to more favorable outcomes. But I said what I said, 9 days is hard.
Okay, so before we close, I would like to invite Dr. Danielle Poe back up to this stage. And we're going to present our guests with a gift. So Danielle.
And also, thanks to everyone for the questions.
Thank you so much. Before we can get that,
Take one.
That's good. I think that's good. I want to thank each of you here today. Eliza, Becky, Taylor, Wendell, Bryce, Mertz. It has been such a pleasure to have you here today, and I've been following the Instagram feed and all of the questions and all of the excitement that this conversation has generated. And I was personally really touched by your thoughts on how having this conversation and really confronting these issues and presenting one's authentic self can really help to make this a more just and fair place. And you've opened up that topic and that opportunity for not only the people here today, but all the people who are asking for the video later. So again, I'm just deeply touched that you came here today to share that with us. And we have a thank you gift to remind you of your time with us.
I have to say, I am from Michigan, but I will accept this enthusiasm.
So welcome to our flyer family, and we'd love to get a picture of each of you with Rudy Flyer.
Yeah, so you remember you saw Rudy earlier. This is where we need Rudy's help. So we're just going to take a quick photo because Rudy has to get out of that costume.
Thank you, Rudy.
All right, so we are now in the closing portion of today's panel. The goal of reality TV is to create entertaining content for audiences to consume. We watch it with our friends and our family. It brings people together. It creates friendships and gives us people to root for. But at all times, we need to keep in mind that we are watching real people navigate real social environments and real interactions.
The paper that we published was easily the most fun I've ever had doing research in my entire career. I didn't really expect anyone to read the paper because no one usually reads my papers. Like even my husband. My husband's here. I love you. You don't read my papers. It's fine. I don't read his either. So, but to find out that not only had people read it, but that these people have read it. It was more than I really could have asked for, as a person and as a fan of each of you. I watched all of you play live, right? Recorded, Taylor live. I've watched you over the years, and I'm really proud of this paper because I'm proud that it validates the lived experience of you all and so many women in reality television. And every year I watch Survivor and now Big Brother, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that each season a woman's not voted out first, right? Women are not less likely to make the merge. So my hope is one day that this work is really obsolete. That gender bias in reality TV isn't a thing anymore. When my daughter is playing Survivor season 83, that she's like, Mom, I don't know what you were talking about back then. But I really hope that this paper becomes something that is not relevant anymore, which is probably weird to say, but it would be really nice to see that. I hope that one day this is not an accurate depiction of our time.
How about a little hand for Erin? All right, so I mentioned it off the top, and before we say goodbye, I just wanted to say it one more time. When Bryce, Wendell, and I launched Real Talk just 8 months ago, we always had the hope that we were going to be able to bring it to an academic audience, because that's where we felt Real Talk has always belonged. When I read Erin's paper, I knew we found the right person and the right university. I think what some of the people in the audience might not know when they watch these shows is, in addition to like rooting for your favorite characters, it has really brought so many of us, and I know all the panelists can attest to this, it's brought so many of us together. It's allowed us to see different places in the world. Like, I never thought I'd be in Dayton, you know?
Don't know why. It's not on his bucket list.
Yeah, so it was our honor to have the University of Dayton host us, for it to be the first university to welcome this kind of discussion. And really quick, because I know we all got a viewing party to go to, panelists, you get the final word. If you could just give us an update on what you're working now. We're gonna go actually with Eliza first.
Okay. So I've been a public defender in Manhattan for the last 14 years as of this month, and I'm just fighting against injustice in our criminal legal system. You can find me raging about it on all social media platforms, Eliza Orleans on TikTok, E. Orleans on Instagram, and I also have Survivor accounts, Survivor Eliza, where I talk about the show and rant about the injustices in Survivor. So thank you all so much for being here. It's really been an honor.
Well, I sort of mentioned it also, I know with the introduction, with the funds from the show, I started the organization Becky's Fund. It is focused on sort of 3 prongs. One is direct services for survivors and their families, helping them everything from relocate, go through court, even hide from their abuser. Also speaking to young people, college students, different groups all over the country, talking about how to build healthy relationships. And last, obviously, advocacy. We are trying to really change the statistic. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so it's been a really amazing time to use the opportunity to talk about the issue. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men are affected by domestic violence, but often because of the stigma, victim shaming, as well as people thinking maybe that this is my fault and that I'm all alone. And so the more that we're able to talk, even talking today and sharing that what I do, is ways to be able to spread awareness, but also let people know they're not alone. And so if you're interested in learning more, you can go to my website, beckysfund.org. We also created an app in 2020 with funding from Booz Allen Foundation, where you could actually text and for support with a directory of the closest shelter, advocate, and even lawyer, as well as having a chat line where you're able to talk to somebody for help, and then a logbook, where often during COVID we know that domestic violence went up 30% all over the world because many people were stuck at home with their abuser. And so the app is called Endovi, ENDOVI.org. So obviously if you want to learn more, please visit. But as well as what we just mentioned before, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been so much fun, as well as being able to obviously share our stories and also inspire you and inspire us to be able to do what we do, but also collaboratively.
So, coming a year off of my Big Brother win, something that I always like to talk about is just how important reality TV is in shaping culture and how American culture shapes who we are as people. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you for the paper that you wrote, because it adds legitimacy to us as reality TV personalities and sharing the message of the impact that we as TV personalities have in the real world. So a year out of the win, I have now been doing interviews for Entertainment Tonight, where I can ask questions of reality TV personalities on the impact they want to have in the world. I also speak often about my experience at Miss USA with some sexual harassment. I'm an advocate for anti-sexual harassment. So please make sure you pay attention to when it happens around you and listen to the women when they share their stories. And you can follow me at the Taylor Mac on Instagram.
Thank you so much for having us. It's truly been an honor. I do host the Purple Pants podcast, the chart-topping podcast that talks about Survivor, Big Brother, Amazing Race, and really a lot of TV shows and other things through the perspective and lens of myself. When DZ comes on the podcast with me from time to time. I also, the Bryce Isaiah 2024 Zaddy calendar is out and available.
No, because why is my ex's calendar?
Lovely. No, but seriously, and obviously Bryson went tour 45. We're hitting all types of places, and so it's just truly an honor to be here. But also, I feel like y'all won't see me next week because with this shirt, I feel like I'm a student now. So UD, where's the stat at? I'll be there.
I just want to thank you guys so much. Oh, let's give it up for Black Content. I just want to thank you guys so much for welcoming us here. It's been a pleasure. This has been our biggest crowd so far. We had 80 people in Toronto a couple weeks ago. We thought that was a big crowd. We had over 190 RSVPs for this one. Thank you guys so much. Bryce and I are good at throwing watch parties for Survivor. We thought that it's more important to do important things like this. So for this to grow to this level and for us to have such dynamic speakers, it just means so much to us. I'm big on speaking things into existence. Some people call it manifestations, but we just would like to continue doing this. We want to go to more universities. We want to come back here, talk about different topics, bring more people together, and just find ways to, we're all connected based on reality TV, and there is a lot of reality TV, and a lot of people experience a lot of things on these shows that actually we see people experiencing in real life, whether it's in schools, neighborhoods, and at the workplace. And we want to keep on talking about not necessarily the easiest topics, but if you talk about these things, things can change. And if you get uncomfortable, things can change. So thank you guys for allowing us to do it. To our wonderful moderators, thank you guys. And to our panelists, thank you guys so much.
All right, so that was fun. Got to see some friends I haven't seen in a while. But I'll tell you this, I'm undefeated at being like unapproachable at college campuses. Every person I say hi to, like they just like look the other way or they pretend like they don't hear me. What is it about me that I'm so off-putting? Now I'm lost, crap. Maybe that's why nobody wants to talk to me, because I look like a like a nomad. I ran into my friends, Tasha and Linda and Amanda, and she was like, I haven't seen you in a while, I have something for you. And she gives me this Richard Simmons party game, so I know what I'm doing later. Hi everybody! Look at that sunset. This really is a pretty campus. The after party was okay. I got to catch up with my friend Mike. Eliza and Becky were nice enough to say they'd go live with me because I do my weekly live recap after the show, but it was so loud in there, it wasn't going to work. But I appreciate them agreeing to do it. Okay, this next part was actually filmed before the gender reality TV event, but chances are if you've made it this far in this video, you're probably not part of the problem. So who is part of the problem? Well, I guess it's the you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? The reality is, and you'll hear from Aliana in just a second here, it's like 1.5% of the population is transgender. So why do we care about that 1.5%? Well, why care about anybody then? You know what I mean? We live in a world where you don't have to accept anybody, or you can accept everybody. That's the beauty of living in our country. But if you want everyone to feel the way chances are you felt, if you're in the 99% of the population, then you probably want everyone to fit in just as well as you do. You certainly don't have to agree with everyone's choices in life or decisions or anything like that. But if you're willing to listen, you'll be able to see maybe a different perspective that you never saw before. If all of your friends walked, talked, and looked exactly like you, the world would be a boring place. Like I said, you don't have to agree with anyone's life decisions or anything like that. But if you're willing to listen, I'm willing to bet that you'll see things from a perspective you never saw before. And I think ultimately it would make you a better person. So being transgender is kind of a newer issue or a newer topic that our country is currently working through. And I don't think there's any better person to hear it from than someone that has lived that life. So here's the video. Enjoy. So I've been doing these weekly live recaps of Survivor every Wednesday night after the show ends. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun for me. But then I came across a comment of yours, and I was like, holy moly, I need to talk to this person. We've got so much to talk about here. I can't wait to get into it. My name's Greg, and this is Aliana. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Correctly. Perfect. Okay, so before we get into this, because Survivor is a social experiment, and you have one heck of an interesting angle here, and I can't wait to talk about it. But first, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Aliana. Please, Ali is fine. I am from the great state of South Carolina, so I've grown up in my entire life here, which is a very conservative red state, as you know.
Yeah.
And I am currently an instructor, so my job is to train case managers in child protective services. So yeah, I spent some time being an investigator for child abuse and neglect, and that was, honing some skills.
Never a dull moment, right?
Never. You're right.
Okay, so why do you want to be on Survivor? Why do you think you have what it takes? What makes you say different from the rest of the world?
So here's the deal. I have been watching Survivor since the inception. I am 36 years old, so I was 14 when Survivor premiered in 2000. And it's just such a fascinating. It's a social experiment. I was a sociology major in undergrad, and I so much love the aspect of deception, but also winning people over for them to, voting them out, but winning them over to vote for you to win. That is such an interesting dichotomy. I mean, where else in the world would you ever get something like that?
A job interview.
or like a court, I guess, a jury, like a real jury.
I guess you've seen enough of that, right?
Yeah, I've been to court a few times. Not on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. So, you wanna drop the mic here, or you want me to? Because this is
Sure.
so
Yeah.
bad. So,
Yeah.
Anna, or Allie, as you prefer, is transgender, and you were born biological male, transitioned to female, correct?
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
what's interesting, so as we've talked about, Survivor is a giant social experiment. And we've had just about every kind of person, nationality, just about everything on Survivor, except one thing comes to mind, and that is someone that has transitioned from male to female. Now, there has been 2 Survivor players in the past that were transitioned from female to male, and we'll talk about why that's different, or why it's perceived as different. And both of those players were actually, well, Zeke was the first one. Zeke did really well in the game, was very popular, and had an infamous tribal council where the guy Varner basically like outed him, and became one of the most hated people in like Survivor history. Made for
I
great
got a story
TV,
for
but
him. If you ever want to hear a story, I got a story.
oh, after yes. As soon as we
Yeah.
get, I do want to hear that story. Remind me
Yeah.
toward. And the other transgender player for Survivor was that went from female to male was Jackson Fox, and Jackson unfortunately had some sort of lithium medication that he did not disclose, and prior to that, I don't think I don't know how that transpired, but I don't think he made it very far in the game. Maybe one of the first few episodes, something like that. But Jackson was quite an interesting character, because here's this big burly guy with tattoos, bald beard. No one in a million years would have ever, misgendered him, I guess you could say.
Right.
So, being that I one thing I love about Survivor is that it is a game of well, how do I say this? I love that it's such a social experiment, and there's so many different types of people. I was just talking to my friend Devin last I think it was 2 weeks ago. She's wheelchair bound, and she said that she wanted to work on Survivor production. And I said, no, I want to see you on the show. I don't know logistically how they would do that, how they would make it fair, but by the same token, life's not fair. You know what I mean? I think
Right.
everybody would agree with that. And it would make for such interesting TV. I love interesting TV. One of the seasons that got criticized so heavily because it was so different, and really they couldn't do this these days. It was a tribe of all black people, all white people, all Asian
Cook
people.
Islands. Mhm.
Yes, I love that. I love stuff
Yeah.
that's different. That's what a social experiment is. So I get it that, by today's standards, they're having a hard time, figuring out that we're in a transition period of our own as a country, because this wasn't an issue 10, 20, 30 years ago necessarily. I'm almost your age. I'm 40, and growing up or in school, I don't know or remember a single person that transitioned. In fact, I only knew 1 or 2 people that were even LGBTQ, because back then, like, you had to hide who you were. Thank goodness, we live in a more inclusive world. But so when we were talking in the chat on Facebook about being on Survivor, your concern was
Well, there's so many things. So,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to Cook Islands, because Cook Islands really laid the groundwork for a lot of what we even see today. You take into consideration Marianne, for example, and her season, and then you have the season with Chanel and Drea, and how Rock Troy, and they were all voted out back to back. That is what I consider a stem from Cook Islands. The concern that the public is going to perceive you a specific way due to who you are. And one of my major concerns as a trans woman, if I were to ever be cast, is the public's perception. We hear currently about trans women in women's sports,
Yeah.
and how that is an unfair advantage, right? So, you think of Survivor. Survivor is a very it's a very gendered show. Most tribes are split up by men and women. Some, we've seen One World, we've seen a whole bunch of other ones where they're divided mostly equally. Well, I am not the fact that the general public is probably going to be like, well, they have an extra man. I totally see that being a case. Or one of my thoughts was, the first man and the first woman to win individual immunity will win, individual immunity. And if I were to win that, the general public's going to say, well, two men won, and I totally recognize that.
Yeah.
But I would say that, I personally have been on hormones for 5 years, and hormones have completely changed my body. I am not the person I used to be. In fact, I actually used to be a cop. I was a cop for 4 years prior to transitioning.
Wow.
And so I always saw myself in very hyper masculine jobs, just to try to kind of force something, that didn't necessarily fit the puzzle. And so I am not strong. Trust me. I can't do the things I used to do in any way whatsoever. But if we even want to talk about like biology wise, there are people who are in sports who are biologically more apt to be good at a sport. For example, Michael Phelps. He was born with an biological abnormality that allows his body to be shaped like, somebody who can swim really fast. He's got
Yeah.
very long
Really
arms,
tall,
torsos,
long. Yeah.
big hands. Exactly. Yeah. So is it an unfair advantage because he has that biological advantage? I don't know. I don't know the answers,
Yeah.
but it is something interesting to consider.
Yeah, so our country's figuring that out right now. The other thing, not just with male and female sports, and I want to get back to that in just a second here, but also just the gender restroom issue right now. I was it Whole Foods the other day, and they had all the restrooms were like family restrooms because I guess they didn't want to
Yeah.
deal or whatever. And I'm a camp counselor in the summertime, and we never want so. We kind of got lucky in a sense. There was arson in one of the bathrooms, so the boys' restroom was closed, so they had to use a portalette, and the girls' restroom was open. And we did have one boy that identified as a girl, but we could use the portalette, so it wasn't like a big deal. But so I called a couple of my friends that are school teachers, and I said, how do I handle this? I don't want anybody to feel like, outcasted or anything like that. And they said, well, here's what we do in school. If we have someone, it doesn't matter if it's boy transition girl or girl identifies boy or whatever the situation is. What we do is they can use the restroom of their choice, but we clear everyone out first. And I'm like, okay, well, that seems fair. I don't see why anybody would have anything, against that. And so far there hasn't been any issues. But of course, now with all the elections coming around this year and school board members running for office, it's like that's like what they're campaigning on. It's like restrooms. It's like, is that really our biggest concern,
Right.
guys? Like, really? I mean, it is something that has to be addressed because it's new. And anytime there's something new, it's good. There's going to be trial and error. I totally agree with that. On the topic of biological male versus biological females, one of my trainers on Friday that I do a HIIT class with, he was telling me just the benefits of being born a male because of testosterone and blah 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 blah. And I'm like,
I don't have any.
yeah, and I thought, okay, well that makes sense. But like from your standpoint, I assume you don't feel like you have any advantages over a biological female at this point because it's been so long. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I literally have no testosterone. I take medicine that it makes it completely gone. In fact, I think I have like a zero. So biological women actually have more testosterone than I do at this
Really?
point. Yeah, but testosterone isn't the only thing that would give me an advantage. I'm not stupid. I do realize that, my hands might be a little bit bigger. I am only 5'6", so I'm not like, 6'3" or, I've never been a big man in the first place. It's just not my body type.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think of people like Sydney from Kovrong. she would have whooped my ass any day, every day. You know, like
Yeah.
probably yours too, right? So
Yeah.
is it unfair that she was cast, right? No, of course not. She worked for that.
What do you remember, like, before your how long ago did you say you transitioned?
So I socially began transitioning in the beginning of 2019. I began hormones in the summer of 2019, and it's been ever since. I
Oh, that
100% transitioned socially, professionally, everything, January 1st, 2020.
wow, that's really, really recent. Wow, I wasn't ex I
It
was
doesn't feel
I was
like it.
expecting, like, a longer time or whatever. Do you recall, like, when you were a police officer, like, what your bench press was versus, say, now?
It
I
didn't work out.
you know
I, d- I don't no I no I so at the police academy I mean I did work out a little bit. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I struggled to carry that 150-pound sack over the line like 6 feet, you know, where you have to rescue the person in the PAT, the physical agility test, when to get into the police academy. I struggled on that. So
Yeah.
and I know now, like just carrying bags of groceries into the house, I struggle. So yeah.
So you do feel weaker, I guess, than, say, before.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, even like my muscle tone is gone compared except for my legs. I still have very muscular legs, but in a good way. Very, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, good
Your
legs.
accent's not gone, I just heard it a little bit. I heard
My what?
a little bit of a southern drawl, just a little bit.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, what give me your thoughts on and I'm an open book to this, I really am, but give me your thoughts on the one criticism I see online is the swimmer that took the you'll know what I'm talking about. The swimmer that took like the that holds the record from transitioning and got a scholarship over
Oh,
one that couldn't. And my argument, and I'm very ignorant to this, so you can certainly enlighten me. But my thing is, that's one in a trillion. I mean, how many? And don't get me wrong, I would sympathize with anyone that lost a scholarship, regardless to who it was to necessarily. But give me your thoughts on that. Like, what's the maybe yours, or just maybe if you want to represent the community, if you can, like just thoughts on that whole scholarship thing.
yeah. So I definitely don't represent the community. Every trans person, every person has a different experience, different life, you know, and I can only speak from my experience and what I feel.
Well said.
Um, Personally, I believe that what is the alternative? So if we want to make this an equitable space for everyone, what can trans people do to have the same opportunities? I've heard people say, well, we need to have like a league for just transgender people. That's not realistic. There aren't enough trans people
Yeah.
to fill out every single sport. And then you have to think regionally. How are they going to get to each other to compete? Like that's just not a realistic thing. Until there is an agreement that can be equitable for everyone, I think this is what it has to be. It's kind of the same thing as bathrooms. Take it back to bathrooms. You know, when I first came out, I didn't look like this. First of all, I hormones have done a lot to my body. They really have in my face. Like I've changed a million times. But I wouldn't go to bathrooms, public bathrooms. I would go
Oh,
to places where I was safe. I would go to like a Starbucks, for example. Starbucks have single stall bathrooms. I would go to maybe a Target. Target was a very outspoken business that was very LGBT friendly. But aside from that, I would just not go to public bathrooms. I live in South Carolina, and when North Carolina did their bathroom ban, I believe they were their very first state that did that. I had a season ticket to Carowinds. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of Carowinds, but there's literally a split down the middle in the park. I would be like, what side of the state am I on right now to see whether or not I could get a bathroom? Now,
wow.
even still, I still get concerned going to the bathroom. You know, it's not a safe place for me. Everybody is like, oh, well, you know, a trans person is going to go in there and molest somebody or something like that.
Yeah,
That is not the point. If
yeah.
anything, I am at more danger. You know, if you force me to go to a men's bathroom, can you imagine what that would be like for me? Right.
I
So,
would definitely be like, "Hey, are you sure you're?" Because I Planet Fitness. Long story short, my 40th birthday, I drove around the country and I did 40 things for my 40th birthday, and every day I would go to a Planet Fitness. So I went to like 40 different ones, And I would say 50% of them, I went in the wrong restroom. I can't tell you how many times I did, just not paying attention, or usually it's on one side, but you're used to being on the other. And I can't tell you how many times I like freaked somebody out. So I instantly
Well,
walked back out, you know?
it's so funny you say that because I've done a podcast before with somebody who considers themselves transgender, but they are definitely the other side of the spectrum of like LGBT rights. They're very like, everybody should be in their own bathrooms or whatever. And her argument is she's again male to female. Her argument is like, well, it's okay for she and I to go into a woman's bathroom. But say somebody that maybe look like you, who consider themselves transgender with a beard or more masculine presenting, shouldn't be allowed to do it. And that's not fair. Everyone's gender identity is specific to them, and there's no right or wrong way to be a man or a woman or anything in between, non-binary or anything else in between. It's what you choose to be. Gender is truly a construct. I believe that. Clothing is gendered, hair, makeup, those are things that you don't have to use or wear or be to be a specific gender. Gender is in your mind, and it's also the way people perceive you. If I didn't look like this, that doesn't change my gender identity. I've done these things to make myself feel better with my dysphoria, but dysmorphia, but I don't have to. That's not the path other people want to transition. The surgeries I've had are only because they made me feel better. They weren't to pass better. I don't really care about that. I did it first, but I don't really care about that now. I'm very proud of my journey, and I have no problem discussing it.
Hmm. And I really appreciate that because I can tell you, like, whether it's, racism or homophobia, most of the people that are those things have never had a gay friend. They've never had a black friend. They've never had someone that's essentially different from them.
Mhm.
And I mean, quite frankly, I get it to a degree because 100 years ago, you know, I don't know that you could have been biracial. You would have had to cross a continent just to find a different kind of person.
Mhm.
I always joke
Well,
with
we
my
called it the one drop rule
one
back
drop
then. I
rule.
don't know if you remember that. Yeah,
No.
that was literally the law. If you had one drop of non-pure white blood, you were
Oh,
considered black or whatever the other race was.
yeah.
And that's not the case anymore. Times have changed. Like the
Look,
world it's a melting pot,
I have great grandparents that had colored drinking fountains. Now think about how crazy
Mhm.
that is. That you had a drinking fountain that you drank out of based on your color. Like, so I
Right.
get it. We're definitely in a transition phase as a country. One thing I do worry about, and I mean this in the sincerest way, is anytime there's like um, a how do I say? Anytime there's like a shift in like climate or culture, you'll see like overcompensation. So, for example, sitting right outside my house after George Floyd got killed, and there was big Black Lives Matter movement. I've got a black truck. I had an American flag on my thing, or on my house, and a couple black girls. They turned around in my cul-de-sac, and the one girl yelled "Black Lives Matter" like in an enthusiastic way, and the other girl yelled "Black Lives Matter," and I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "You can't fight racism with more racism. Like you're literally profiling me." Because because I'm white, and I'm sure they saw a big black truck and an American flag and just assumed that I was against Black Lives Matter, but there was overcompensation because of it was like you couldn't avoid it. You know what I mean? The
Mhm.
whole George Floyd that was everywhere. And what I do worry about with people transitioning now, especially with kids, because like I was a late bloomer. I was 18 when I hit puberty. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know anything about anything. And I don't know if I would have been had a lot of outside influences at an early age, if that would have affected me or my brothers or anyone else at that age. Because like I said, when we were younger, we didn't know anybody that was even LGBTQ because you couldn't be, you weren't allowed to be. And my concern is particularly with hormone replacement and stuff, and again, I'm very ignorant to this, I don't know how hard it would be to go back. So just like when like gay marriage was finally legalized, so will gay divorce. You know what I mean? Gay divorce will happen. That's
Mhm.
just statistics. So my concern is in the next maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years, whatever, that a lot of the younger people that transition just because maybe it was trendy at the time or it was just big in the media or something like that, they're going to be trying to retransition, which I assume if you tried to go
Detransition.
infinitely harder. I assume.
Mhm.
Is that correct or am I wrong?
So the term is detransition, and actually, I did detransition. In 2017, I actually came out to my very best friend. We were having some martinis at a really great martini bar here in Columbia, South Carolina, And I just kind of blurted it out. In fact, I quit my job in law enforcement and I was moving to Orlando because I perceived Orlando as a more accepting place than South Carolina. Well, I ended up lasting about 3 weeks in Orlando before I moved back up here. And
Wow.
I had abandoned my entire idea of transitioning. And she was like, "We ever going to talk about that again?" I was like, "No, I'll tell you when I'm ready." Right. So
Yeah.
here's the thing with the whole children thing. So there was a study done recently about left-handed people. And have you heard this?
No, enlighten me.
Okay, so in the early 19th century, left-handedness was considered derelict. You were considered derelict if you were left-handed, right? So people forced themselves to be right-handed so that they didn't fall in the category of people who were special needs in some way, right? When in the 1940s or so, left-handedness became more acceptable. They started creating things that would assist people with left-handedness, and the rise of people who identified as left-handed and use their left hand just increase exponentially over the next like 30 years. More and more and more people, right? Because they weren't forced to use their right hand by society. It's very similar to transitioning. I my biggest pet peeve of people when they ask me about transitioning, which I'm very comfortable talking about most of it, is when did you know? When did you know that you were trans? Well, here's the thing. There wasn't a date. There wasn't a time. There wasn't any specific age. And that's because I didn't know trans people existed. I'm 36. I grew up in rural South Carolina. We didn't have the internet until I was like 19, right? 18, 17, something like that. And even that was like literally a dial up, right? So I didn't know that those people existed. I didn't even know gay people existed. We had one
Wow.
stoplight, you know? So the fact that social media is out there now, it is more people, complain about it being shoved in their face. That's saving lives. It really is. We already know the suicide rate for LGBT
Yeah.
people is far higher than cisgender or heterosexual people, and gender affirming care. All of that stuff goes into saving lives. That's yeah.
So, transitioning this into Survivor here.
Yes.
With when it comes to Survivor, obviously giant social experiment. The issue with casting in particular is going to be a lot of the things you've already mentioned. How do we put a biological male that's transitioned into female versus someone else on the tribe? Now, I don't know how they would do that. I don't know if you have, one of each to try to make it fair. I don't know, but like, how would you see that playing out on the show?
Well, I do think we're in the new era of Survivor, and I don't necessarily think it would be as big of a deal as it would have been maybe 5, 6 years ago.
Oh, totally.
We see with like Jeff Probst dropping "Come on in, guys," right? We see that. We see the diversity that we never had before. We see the fact that, and I don't, the other classification of people or the type of people that I don't think that we've seen is a non-binary person. I don't believe we've ever seen anyone out that uses they them, for
Yeah.
example, as their pronouns. Maybe so. And you know what? There may have been a trans woman. We don't know because they maybe weren't out, right? But I think that casting would have to pick somebody very passable. And I say that with a lot of frustration because it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
But in order for society to accept it, look at Zeke, look at Jackson. It's going to have to be somebody kind of like, I don't know if you're a Big Brother fan, but Audrey Middleton. Like, nobody would know Audrey was a trans woman, back in the day when I think she was like Big Brother 17. I'm not a Big Brother fan personally, but so nobody would know that just from looking at her. And I think that's how it would have to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. It would have to be someone that's like obviously looks first and foremost, but also someone that says, hey, I could see Survivor going, okay, so this person was born a male, identifies as a female, but in the challenges only wants to face males or something like that. Like something like more, God, how do I put that? Something that's more like you're never going to make everybody happy, but I could see casting going, okay, how can we alienate as few people as possible and still do this? Now, the LGBTQ community is probably going to be like, oh, this is bull crap. Like they're not one of us or something like that. But I could totally see, I just don't know how that would go in competitions. Like what do you think is more likely?
I think it's time for Survivor to drop the gendered challenges. I don't think that that's
Have you noticed
necessary.
a lot fewer of the gender challenges
Of
recently.
course, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because, and I mean, I can't say for sure because I'm obviously not in that world necessarily, but it's because, they dropped the come on in guys because guys is a gendered word. Even if it isn't meant to be that way, you don't mean it in that way, it technically can be. Of course, it's a gendered word.
Yeah.
But it's also very similar. Like, if somebody doesn't necessarily identify as a man or a woman, maybe they, there have been some people that could very well have been non-binary on the show. So maybe they've already started dropping that. We just haven't really heard about it because they got so much crap for come on in guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I've definitely noticed a lot more group challenges, and in a
Hmm.
setting like that, that wouldn't impact, what
Right.
someone is whatsoever.
They
Interesting.
also have a lot more autonomy in who they pick for what part of each challenge in a group challenge. So think about like pick some swimmers, pick some puzzle people. They don't tell people who it has to be anymore.
Oh, that's right. They used to say, okay, we need a guy from
Hmm.
each tribe or something like that.
Right.
I never even noticed that. That's really interesting. Um, wow, I never even thought about that. But you're right, they have been doing that. I just remember like when me and my grandma used to watch it, and when I was, oh gosh, in my 20s, and she would say, "Yo, Greggy, did you see Kelly with the blonde hair?" I was like, "Wait a minute, Kelly with the blonde short hair? No, Kelly with the blonde at the tall hair or with the long hair. No, 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 Kelly. You're talking about short Kelly. Like they were all named Kelly and they were all blonde.
Right.
And now
Yeah.
it's like I do think that representation is important and it does matter, and I'm glad that they're being more diverse. It's a lot easier to identify characters. There's still
Hmm.
typecasting though. There's always going to be the nerdy guy with the story or the
Right.
old or the young black guy. They're always going
Hmm.
to typecast like that, in my opinion. But it's
But here's the thing about that. Here's the other way that Survivor could flip a trans person being a trans woman could be on there. They could either do it where it's incognito, like Zeke, and only come out in a moment, or it could be somebody from the very beginning that's just out and proud and comfortable doing it. That either one could work. I think if somebody were out and proud at the very beginning, it's going to ease people into it a lot easier than just like a surprise like Zeke. I think that really was surprising to a lot of people. I don't think people saw that coming. But
yeah,
it's a lot easier for a female to male.
yeah.
It's a lot more accepted.
I would.
And I'm not sure why, but it is.
Well, you always see like these Dateline NBC stories, and the girl was tricked the guy, and the guy killed her, and stuff like that. So, like but you never really hear about like the other way around. You know what I mean? You
Hmm.
never hear like a girl that transitioned to a guy tricks someone, and then the girl kills him or something like that. The news. God love the news. Um, that's interesting. Back to the so the diversity thing on Survivor. Um, I definitely think it's a good thing, but I think they're going through some growing pains right now with casting and trying to figure out, what's working, what's not. Because I can tell you from the internet chat boards and all this, every other word out of somebody that doesn't like Survivor, woke, 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 and
Oh
heck
yeah.
know what that word means. I personally don't like that word. Just like like I got kind of pinned my dad down on it. I said, Dad, would you rather have a doctor from the January 6th riots, or would you rather have a doctor that's woke? And he couldn't answer that question because to me, woke just means like you care more. You're more in touch with
Mhm.
like others' feelings and all that. Why? How that became a bad thing, I have absolutely no idea. But I digress.
It
Uh,
is that. It woke stands for inclusion. And
Kind of how
the
I
fact that people argue against inclusion just baffles me.
Well, sometimes things take on different meanings that they never had before. Like the flag. The American flag to some people represents racism, whereas
Mm.
to others it represents freedom. It just
Sure.
depends on I don't know.
Freedom for who?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just try to see things from as many, sides as possible because I only have lived my life. I haven't lived everyone else's, but you know, every few years you meet someone that's completely different, and then next thing you know, you've got a friend from a different walk of life, and you see things
Mhm.
differently. And I really appreciate that, and certainly appreciate you sharing your story because it's one that you just don't hear very often. Because it's what percentage? If you do, this is gonna be hard to guess, but what percentage of the population is transgender or LGBTQ or one of those things?
I think the current population for trans people is like 1.7%, but that is not like really an accurate number. There's a lot of non-reporting due to society pressure
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of people who are just not out or comfortable. There's some people who haven't decided that they're trans yet. They haven't identified themselves in that way, right? Technically, non-binary people are under the trans umbrella. So that probably skews that number even higher, but I don't know that the statistic I just gave you
Yeah.
includes them.
What about LGBTQ? Do you have any idea what percentage of the population would identify?
The number used to be like 10%.
I
But
would have,
yeah,
truthfully.
you
Huh.
what?
I would have guessed higher than that, truthfully. I mean, just so I re-entered, I'm a straight male. I re-entered the dating world like in the last year, and on my Hinge app or whatever, it's
Mhm.
like every girl on there identifies as like bisexual.
Mhm.
And I'm like, where did that come from? Like, I don't ever remember meeting, as many girls I've dated in my life. Statistically speaking, half of them, I guess, according to my Hinge app, were, and I just didn't know, or now they feel like they can be. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
this
I think
2023 is a weird year to be dating. That's all I got to say.
yeah. Well, and I think the word pansexual probably applies to most people if they just don't use it correctly. I personally consider myself pansexual. Basically that means like I, I could be attracted to anybody as long as they're, well, demisexual is like your personality, but I could be attracted to anybody's gender. Like I could be attracted to a trans man, trans woman,
Uh,
cisgender. It doesn't necessarily matter to me as long as you're just a great person, right?
yeah,
I am in a relationship with a cisgender man who considers himself heterosexual. So,
cisgender. So help me out with that.
biological male.
Biological male. Okay, gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, these are all things that like you just so few again. So if it represents 1 or 2% of the population, what are the odds that everyone has at least one friend that is part of that 1 or 2%? You see what I mean? And
Very
like
rare.
like I kind of akin it to like racism, for example. Like if you're like a grandparent, super racist, and then all of a sudden you have um, a biracial grandbaby, racism goes out. It's like it just disappeared. And I think I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day. It takes a generation of people to die out, unfortunately, but
Hmm.
that's the way it is because some people are just set in their ways and they'll never change their mind, and they never have, they never will, and it's just the way of the world.
But the same people who are so anti woke right now are the ones that lived through like the sexual revolution in the 70s, and so it's baffling to me that the people who were pushing, free love and
Oh
hippie movement and all disco era and all that stuff are now saying, you have to fit in a box.
yeah.
It's just where
Well,
did that go?
it's easy to put people in a box. I get it, and it makes like when you see someone as something, it's just easier to always see them as that thing. It's hard, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, like I can kind of understand that. I give passes to like my dad and just people that are older just because it's like they don't get it. They're never going to get it. I just, all you can do is try. But at the end of the day, it's like, it just takes a generation of people to die out. Just like with like cryptocurrency. My dad is never
Mhm.
going to use cryptocurrency. It's just not going to happen. And but the grandkids, they'll never hold a fiat dollar. They're not going to know
Mhm.
what that is. Like, so it just
This is
takes.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting that you compared the two. I
Sorry,
don't I don't give
like
people
forgive
passes.
me for not being I don't know what like
Woke.
well not necessarily like just the I don't know the terminology. Like at the end of
Mhm.
the day, like I'm very ignorant, but I don't have hate in my heart, and that's kind of the way that I try to approach things.
So
I say things completely
you're not
wrong.
ignorant. You're not ignorant. So
Oh, I
I actually
do a lot of
one of the courses that I train is a bias awareness training. And that's because in case management, child protective services, that is something that could seep into people's minds, right? So we want to try to we call it awaken. So we cannot eliminate biases. You can't, I can't, none of us can. And that's really biological. That's our mind making snap decisions.
yeah.
It's the limbic system, really fight, flight, or freeze. But we can do what we call awaken, which is when we really like work through it. Where did this come from? And there's an aspect of that is asking. So asking people questions, as long as you ask people respectfully or you have a relationship with people where you could ask them, right? So when people ask me things, I'm usually pretty very open to it because I want people to educate themselves. I want people to have that experience because the only way we're going to do better as a society is if we learn from each other.
I think you're a good representative for that. Is what you're talking about, is that the same thing as like unconscious bias? Is that kind of
It
the
is. Well, yeah, so unconscious bias is that snap judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, I found myself guilty of that a few times. I was downtown. We have this event called Blink, and like people light up the town. It's amazing. It's such a cool thing. And I saw a guy with a hoodie from behind, so it's not like I saw his race or anything like that. But and of course it was an alley, and I'm like, oh crap! Like I got like, and I was like, wait a minute, would I have felt the same way had the person turned around, depending on their color? I had to ask
Mm.
myself because I don't know. Unfortunately,
But that's good though. You're supposed to ask yourself those things
yeah,
because if you can be honest with yourself and say like, no, I might have felt a different way. That's when you can start working on those things. You can bring light to it in your own mind and start like working through going from unconscious to a conscious bias, like conscious decision making about what your mind is receiving.
yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Um, Anything else you want to relate back to Survivor here? We're all over.
Let's see here.
You have
I
a,
mean,
but I wanted to finish with that about Varner. Is that right?
oh, sure. Yeah. So,
Go into that now. If you want to finish on that later, it's all good. I promise.
okay, yeah. Well, so I guess one big thing that I would like to say is like, you talk about your dad and I guess I think you mentioned a grandparent, but anyway, so I don't have a relationship with my family. I don't speak to anyone in my family. They are South Carolinians. They are the type of person you think of when you think of South Carolina. And that's fine because that's the people they want to be. But in order for me to feel comfortable and live my life, I came out at 32 as trans. And it was more beneficial for me to just move away from them. Not even physically, just cut ties with them because they were so damaging to my mental
Yeah.
health. And one thing that I will say is interesting and I do regret is that my mom passed away in 2019. And I do wish that I would have had the opportunity to tell her. I came out socially, like I said, at the beginning of 2019. She passed away in July of 2019. I started hormone replacement in August 1st of 2019. So
Uh,
right after she passed away. But um, I do have regrets. I don't believe that people shouldn't live with regrets. Like people who say that, like that's not a real thing. Everybody has regrets,
yeah, of
but I
course.
do have regrets. I wish I would have been able to be the daughter for her, and she died of cancer, so care for her in the ways that she probably needed a daughter to do. But I don't have any sisters or anything. Um, but one pleasantry of that whole situation is when she was cremated, I actually wrote her a really beautiful letter. And I gave it to the funeral director for them to cremate with her, to burn with her. And that was kind of like my way of telling her. So I say all that to say, like, I wish I would have been able to come out to her, but I kind of did in my own way.
Yeah,
And, if she were still alive, I think it would be an easier relationship with my dad and my other parts of my family. But
yeah,
yeah, without her, no.
yeah. I'm sorry. I do relate with that. I was estranged from my mom for 10 years as well, and it took literally a chance encounter with Richard Simmons. And I'll tell you that story another day. That's a fun story, but um the one thing I tell people when I do tell that story is that time is like one of the few things that can heal just about anything, assuming you get enough of it. And I always tell people that to try to give them hope, in this case at least, with like your father and everything. And then on the other hand, I tell people sometimes our parents teach us who not to be and show us who not to be, and that's life, you know what I mean? Unfortunately, it's just
Mhm.
one of the things. But yeah, I'm sorry you have to go through that. You said you're an only child, or you have brothers?
I have one brother. Yeah.
You have a brother, yeah, and
Mhm.
you don't have a relationship with him either?
We have yeah, funny story. He was in town one night. He lived at Charleston, and he was in town one night and was like, "Hey, let's grab a drink." And I happened to be downtown too, and I was like, some things have changed. I'm a little different nowadays. And we ended up meeting at my favorite bar. I picked the place I feel safe,
Yeah.
and I literally was standing in front of him. Like he was standing here, I was right here, and he just like looking
Oh
past me, and I was
god.
like, "Hey!" And he immediately, no, there was no questions, like there was nothing. It was like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like sat down, had some shots, like just
Yeah.
enjoyed the night, and ever since then we still communicate. But he's been great. He doesn't tell my secret to people, even though it's not really a secret. But he doesn't like he hasn't outed me, which is nice.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad you know what I would love to see for you? is first of all, you on Survivor. Second of all, them bringing back the loved one visits, and I
Mm,
love to see your brother, your dad be the loved one on the other. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
that
Uh,
would be cool. I have thought about that. Like if I ever really truly were cast on Survivor, like
yeah.
obviously, secrets out.
So
But
so have you been putting tapes out and all that?
I've only once. Don't hate me. Yeah.
It's
Only So I just don't know where to even begin. I sat down in front of a camera one time and just talked, and I was like, "Well, that's not gonna go well." I don't know how to edit videos. I'm too old for all that, and I just,
you
I just wish I could get their attention. Just listen to me talk
yeah,
for a little bit, and like you'll love me.
yeah. So if you have an iPhone, I assume
Hmm.
iMovie on there. That's what I use for all my vlogs. Super simple. It really is not hard to learn, honestly. Have you ever been? Well, I assume if you only applied once, you've never been to an open casting call, have you?
There was one in Bowling Green, I think Thursday of this week, tomorrow,
Yeah,
wait, Thursday, and I was gonna go, but it's like an 8 hour drive,
yeah,
and yeah, can't afford that, and I can't take off the time.
yeah.
That short of notice.
There'll be more for sure, but usually I don't know. I don't know how I feel about open casting calls sometimes, but um, you definitely, the Lynn Spillman, the previous casting director, she told me, she goes, Greg, everybody has a story. I was like, no one has a story like mine, and they never will. And I walked away from her, and sure enough, the next day she messaged me like, hey, send me a tape. It's like, really, all I had to do was be a jerk, and then, but she's no longer with the show. She got fired, and I think it has to do with because they're moving like we've talked about to a more diverse um show
What
basically.
was her name? Lynn?
Lynn Spillman, she was the previous
Yeah.
director. Um, but
I
yeah,
tried to talk to Jesse Tannenbaum on Instagram, but he doesn't reply to my messages.
yeah, yeah. So,
I'll get him one day.
I would say I just feel like you have such an interesting story, and I love the background of being a police officer because that's one thing. The one thing I've noticed that kind of bridges the gap between people that either don't know or don't accept the community versus people that do is law enforcement, previous background in the military, that sort of thing. And I definitely would for lack of a better term, ham that up. I would definitely play that up for sure in your tape and just tell about the struggle. Just be the biggest mistake I think people make in casting is they try to be something they're not. Like one season, if you watched Russell Hantz, then all of the applications the very next season are going to be people trying to be a villain, right? And then if you see somebody like Marianne, then all of the next season everyone's going to try to be the nicest person ever. Right now, because of Hannah quitting in the very first episode, the bar has been lowered so low that everyone is applying just because they think all it takes now is not quitting. You know what I mean? Truthfully, I think that there's a millisecond that if they see you at the right place at the right time, they'll put you on. But I think it's better in life to be lucky than good because anybody can be good. You just have to be consistent, right? But to
Right.
be lucky, you just have to get lucky. You know what I mean? But if you're good long enough, eventually you get lucky. That's kind of my philosophy. So, as far as applying for Survivor, I look at it the same way I would look at dating. Like you might strike out 100 straight times, but one time is all it takes to make something special happen or to meet that special someone and blah, blah, blah. So definitely apply. There's no reason not to. I mean, even if your tape's bad, who knows? You might be what they're looking for. You,
Right.
you just never know exactly. I mean, you can kind of so like the previous casting director, she said I was like Maddie Maddie Whitmore. He was
Hmm.
a fitness instructor,
He's
blah.
so cute. I love Batty.
Yeah, yeah. His grandpa was the guy in Shawshank Redemption. I think of what his name was, but
Oh yeah. You're talking about Maddie from Gabon, I believe,
yeah.
right? Hmm.
But anyway, they do typecast. So
Of course.
first of all, just because you can't tell personality from looking at someone, all you can tell is what they look like. They're gonna boom look at you and go, okay, is she the nerd? Is she the jock? You know what I mean? And it's just like process of elimination. But
Hmm.
they say that they know within the first few seconds of watching your tape whether or not you're going to be right for whatever it is they're looking for at the time. I don't know. I mean, I would get your main talking points out just in the first few sentences. Just hey, transgender woman from South Carolina, used to be a police officer. Boom. That alone, if I was in casting, that would get my attention. Like, wait a minute, what she just say?
Hmm.
Because yeah. I mean, yeah. I wish you the best on that, and I hope they actually. The thing that drives me nuts about casting is you never even know if they see your tape. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that drives me.
That's really what my biggest deterrent was. After I did it the first time, I was like it's just a waste of time, you know. But then you have stories like Brandon,
Yeah,
from this current season. Like he's auditioned 110,000 times, I
yeah,
believe. So maybe there is, you know, something to say for that. Tenacity is one of the 3 words I would use to describe myself. You know how they always ask, like, what are
yeah,
3 words? Tenacious would be one, and so I guess I should prove it, you know,
yeah.
by applying more.
Uh, I just talked to Brandon actually 2 days ago, and I told him, I said, I think the angle for you, because we're never going to have another legend in Survivor until they start bringing people back, because you can't just be a legend off of one season. I don't care how good you are. And I said, Brandon, I think the way your angle to bring you back is that you've got to make yourself, because let's face it, you were perceived as weak, that they didn't do a very good job of making you look tough or strong. I said, go hit the weights, go train for an MMA fight, do something like hyper masculine, basically. If he came back just completely
Mm.
jacked out of his mind, I think they'd put him back on the show. I really do. I really do. So,
I thought from episode 2, I was like, oh man, he's going to go deep. I really did. They were starting to like make him look like he was turning it around. David writing him.
yeah.
And I was like, man, this guy's going to do well. Same thing they're doing with Emily, quite
Yes,
honestly. You
exactly my
know,
thoughts.
yeah.
Exactly my
I
thoughts.
hope, to be honest, I kind of really like her now, and I think most people do, and I really hope
Yeah.
that she continues to do her thing.
Yeah.
I'm a little bitter about Sabaya, but that's fine too.
Yeah. Yeah, but they do such a good job editing. I can't tell you how many times I've
Hmm.
predicted the winner and been dead wrong.
Right,
Every
right.
episode, they just do such a good job. And let's face it, they only give us so much information, so we only have so much to go off of anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
If somebody wanted to edit this conversation between you and I, they could make it sound any way. They could take it any
right.
direction they want. So, I get it that they're gonna do what they're gonna do, but before we get off here, I want to hear this story. You said you had a story about Varner. Is that right?
Sure, yeah. So, don't sue me, Jeff Varner. Um, I'm not really afraid of him. Anyway, so I've followed him on Instagram for a while because, quite honestly, season 2, I knew I could tell he was a little gay, and back then I identified in that manner too. And so, outside of Richard Hatch, he was really the first gay person on the show. Second, I guess technically. And well, actually, like the fourth, because Sonia Christopher is also a lesbian. But anyway, I identified similarly to him. He was obviously a good bit older than me. He was probably, I think, 28 when he first started. Anyway, so when his second chance came around, I was all about it. I was like, hell yeah, Jeff Varner. I would love to see him, especially him and Kimmy together. Like, that would be such a cool duo. So I followed him on Instagram for a really long time. After the whole Zeke thing, I still followed him because I believe people make mistakes. I truly believe that. And that was a mistake. He owned up for it. He apologized. And I believed him, like people learn from their screw ups, you're in front of millions of people and you're fighting for $1 million, people fuck up, like that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And, anyway, so on Instagram, he had posted something about drag queens and it was when the anti-drag or drag bans were really going on. And he would basically was insinuating, not even insinuating, he was saying that drag queens are pedophiles, that drag queens performing in front of children is grooming and all of this stuff. And like, that is just so not true. That
Yeah.
is so not true. And so I commented on his picture because I was like, this dude, how are you in the community? And you're so like, I just don't get that. But anyway, so he jumped in my inbox on Instagram and we just went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And basically it all stemmed down to him calling me a pedophile and a groomer and all these really, really rude, nasty things. And I was just finally like, this man, he would send me like 10 messages in a row, long paragraphs. And I was like, this man is unhinged, quite frankly. He is kind of nutty. And maybe what happened between him and Zeke and how he was portrayed is truly how he is. Like, I should have never, I don't regret, of course, giving him the opportunity and trying to look the best at him, but he's clearly that person. And
Yeah.
he can say, and he can pretend like, I think his words were like, I have a lot of trans friends. No, you don't. No, you don't. If you did, you wouldn't have said what you did,
Yeah.
Even the best laid intentions can be screwed up, but that was not one of them.
Yeah.
He was basically saying that because Zeke was lying about he wasn't even lying. He just wasn't out. not coming out is not lying. That's self-preservation, you know, like, and what Zeke said about not wanting to be the transgender survivor contestant is exactly how I feel almost every day. That's why I don't advertise it, because I don't want to be like, oh, you know, Allie, the trans girl, you know, like, no, I want to be
Yeah.
Allie, you know, the social worker or this person or whatever. I don't want that to define who I am.
Yeah,
I'm so much more than that.
I always tell people I try to judge people on personality and character, not age, race, religion, gender, things that maybe you can't necessarily control. But as far as he goes, you know, honestly, sometimes sometimes I take it as a compliment that I wasn't cast on Survivor, because if this is what they're looking for, you know what I mean? That's a compliment that you're not that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, don't scratch me off, Survivor casting people, but like that made great TV. It
yeah,
really did. We're
yeah,
still talking about it today. You know, I might not remember what season Maddie was on, even though I do, because I literally remember every season ever.
yeah, that was
But
pretty good. I was impressed.
yeah, quiz me anytime. I got you. But you know, it's a talking point. It got the media coverage. It got ratings, and you know, it is a TV show after all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had so many. I could not believe after Hannah quit in the first episode, how many people vindicated me and reached out. This guy walks across America. He would give anything to be on the show, and this person didn't even want to be in quit and blah blah blah. I wasn't the slightest bit offended, because, like, honestly, it did make for good TV. And the previous casting director, I know for a fact, used to cast people knowing they would quit. So that doesn't.
And Greg, Hannah did not take your spot. Like,
No,
y'all are
exactly,
not the same
exactly.
archetype, you know, like that
Yeah,
would never have been a case.
yeah.
Hannah to me was like a Caroline. I was so excited to see her play. In fact, I thought she would do well. But you know, for her, I've seen what she said after the fact, and nicotine withdrawal is a huge thing.
Yes.
You think back to like Shane Powers
Yeah.
in
Yeah. That's
Panama. He went crazy.
Yeah.
Like the things he was saying to that girl Courtney, I was surprised they didn't kick him off, except
Yeah.
for the fact that it was good TV. But I mean, there was some things. Yeah,
And
Zane
casting,
was another one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're not dumb. They knew that they were going to have a hard time staying in the game with a nicotine withdrawal, for sure, for
Well,
sure.
that's
So
the same thing about Jackson. Like, there's no way.
I thought
There's
that too. How, I don't know how he could have gotten past all that. And it was
no, because they do blood tests. They do
uh,
blood tests. They do all kind of stuff on you. There's no way they didn't know that.
I cannot think of what the name started with Z, right?
Zoloft.
No. It wasn't Zoloft. It was well, maybe that's the generic for it. It was not zinc. It was, did it start with an L? Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. I just looked at it.
Oh yeah, you said it earlier. It was lithium.
Lithium, yeah. And it's like, yeah, I have a hard time believing that they didn't catch that. It was almost like that was a moment that they, I don't want to say created, but they knew would happen. You know what I mean? Just like if
Okay,
you,
but
it's
how did it happen day one? He was the first one out. He didn't
yeah,
even. I don't even think he lasted like a day.
yeah,
So they knew. I don't know for sure, but I feel
you're
like
right.
they knew that, you know, they do blood tests. They know your background. They know your medical history.
Yeah,
And I mean, I know that you have access to medication on there, on the, like, I would still get my hormones, you know, you have
yeah.
birth control, you have whatever medication you need, provided to you. I don't know why he wouldn't have disclosed it. Cause I mean, you know how many people in America are on lithium antidepressants?
Yeah. And he
Like,
actually did say in his he did say that he didn't disclose it, which I thought was kind of interesting. But even then, like, you would think that in a drug test that would pop up, or a doctor's you know, your medical history, or something along those lines. I don't know. Yeah,
right. But do we want to be naive enough to believe that,
who
you know?
knows? Who knows?
I
Yeah,
don't either.
yeah. Well, Aliana, or Ali, sorry. I
It's
do
fine.
appreciate your time. I appreciate your openness. And,
Mhm.
you know, I wish everyone needs to hear your story, because if they don't have a friend that's gone through anything close to what you've gone through, they need one, just to see that other side of life, and try to be more relatable and empathetic. And empathy is a good thing. I think if we all had more of it, the world would be a better place. But I really
Sure.
appreciate your time. And I hope that I see you on Survivor one day. Maybe Survivor. What's the next one? 47 is what they're casting for. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. I'd be better on 48. I'm good with even numbers.
You like even numbers?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Survivor casting, we're going to see Ali on season 48. Until next time, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you on the show.
Thanks so much, Greg. Bye.
So I said at the end of this video, I'd give Jerry Springer's final thought. And to sum this video up, as simple as possible, I would just say treat people the way you want to be treated. And you know what? I think that'll solve 99% of the world's problems. One last thing. Let me touch on the binary, non-binary pronoun thing that people seem to be losing their minds over. So my name is Greg. If you said, "Hey, Craig," I would correct you and say, no, my name is Greg. And if you kept calling me Craig, I would assume that you're either a jerk or an idiot, maybe one or the other. But it all comes down to respect. If you want to be called something and you respect that person, you should respect them enough to call them what they want to be called by. In the words of my brother, my name is Jamie.